Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel and welcome to my Omnibus series. I've got so many of these omnibuses that are going to come out so that you'll be able to listen to an hour's worth of stories, which I know you're going to love. You know, the thing is that telling stories is such a fine art, and it's something that was practiced hundreds of years ago when people didn't have the technology that we have today. And everyone would gather around the fire and listen to a wonderful story. And also, what is so wonderful about a story is that personally, I think it is the best way to go to sleep. Every night when I go to bed, I always listen to stories. And that's something that parents used to do with their children. It's something that they still do with their children. There's nothing better than a good story. And so I hope you're going to enjoy this series. And before we start, I just want to say, do subscribe to my channel because you don't want to miss out on anything. Because I'm in for the long haul and I want to make sure that you get the most stunning stories to go to bed with at night or to listen to when you want to be one of those people sitting beside the fire and listening. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and let's get started. I hope you're going to enjoy the omnibus.
Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners, I live directly opposite a house that is rumoured to be haunted. It doesn't bother me all that much, although in the very beginning I felt somewhat reticent about moving into this house, as it overlooked something as unsettling and outer-worldly as the Shannon house. By all accounts, on a very overcast day, when the sky is a gunmetal grey colour, with a threat of rain hanging in the air, the dingy, tenebrific atmosphere that hangs over the Shannon house is like a dark, ominous, foggy curtain, which can be extremely menacing at the best of times. If I stare out of my large bay windows of my living room, even for a brief moment, that most unfortunately overlook the facade of the Shannon house, with its morbidly grey exterior, where burgeoning vines rambunctiously climb up the walls, while the dark, vacuously empty windows stare back at me so soullessly. This foreboding house seems to be, dare I say it, but the Shannon house appears to be permanently caught under a grim halo. But on stormy days such as this, where there is an inauspicious, moody sky, it only serves to exacerbate how seriously sinister the place really is. On occasions like this, I will draw my curtains to block out the less than auspicious view. For some reason, I always have a sense that I'm being watched, as if the Shannon house is in some way alive, and yet dead at the very same time, if that makes any sense at all. The place seems to remind me of a woman wearing sackcloth and ashes, who is mourning the loss of her husband when he never returned home from a long sea voyage, for he was probably drowned at sea, or maybe his ship hit a rock and sunk. And such is the grief of this poor woman that she boldly wears her lugubrious melancholia on her person, that is so tangible you can actually feel it. And nothing says keep away more than an aggressively forsaken energy such as this. This is why on most days of the week I have wisely conditioned myself to avoid looking at the Shannon house, if I can possibly help it. But it's not always that easy to accomplish such a goal. Sometimes in an unguarded moment I can't help myself but briefly steal a glance at the property, and when I do, I almost always regret it, because I will stare at the house for longer than I should, and an electric prickle of great trepidation overcomes me, and it is so profound I can actually feel the bitter taste of gall consume the back of my throat, and there have been times that I have rushed to the ladies' room to throw out the contents of my stomach. I've never known a house to have such a profound, powerful effect like this over my emotions. Unfortunately, something that is staring at you in the face morning, noon and night, at the very best of times, is difficult to ignore, unless, of course, you pull the curtains permanently. I don't like to do that, as I love to allow the pretty beams of sparkling sunlight into the house to brighten up my home. I don't fancy living permanently in the darkness just to block out the views from the house opposite. Sometimes the best thing to do is to pretend the Shannon house isn't even there, and that it doesn't even exist. But that's just wishful thinking on my part. I never believed in ghosts until I moved into a house that overlooks the town's reputably most haunted house. But after I moved here, I can hand on heart honestly say I have become much more open-minded to the idea of ghostly phenomena, when such thoughts in my past when I was a city girl would have seemed all but preposterously insane, but not so much any more. I fortunately acquired my current property at an absolute steal. I am told the previous owners that had lived here for 30 years were advised to drop the price of my home substantially and sell it for a fraction of what it was really worth, so they got a raw deal simply because their property overlooked a house with a haunted reputation. Some people won't buy a house that has an unsightly view, or overlooks a cemetery or a haunted house. But when you are limited, well, on a limited budget, so to speak, many people desiring to have a home that they can call their own simply don't have the luxury of choice, so sometimes you have to settle for the best deal which you can possibly get, which is what I invariably did. Of course, I was forced to do a whole lot of soul-searching, but in the end I knew I would never find such an amazing house in such an idyllic location for so little money, and the alternative of living in a dingy matchbox-size apartment held no appeal to me whatsoever. I reasoned with myself that living opposite a haunted house couldn't be all that bad. I was from the city of Atlanta, and unlike the superstitious people living here in this small, rather charming rural town in the Pacific Northwest, I was not given into the idle fancies that some of the townsfolk literally indulge themselves in, where they would allow superstitions to cloud their judgment and dictate some of their choices. I'm pretty sure folk around here would never be seen dead walking under a ladder. If the truth be told, I was not best pleased to purchase a home that overlooked a house with a very disquieting, haunted reputation. And even though I believed the ruminations about the place were just fictitious hogwash, I could not deny to myself that the first time I'd laid eyes on the Shannon house, the place was so incredibly foreboding that it seemed to crawl under my skin like an infestation of maggots. I knew that with one glance at the Shannon house, something bad had happened there, and it was after sensing this, I am now utterly convinced that the houses that we reside in are like living sea sponges that soak up the energy of anything negative that may have happened in a place, almost like an invisible recording that keeps being replayed back in our time. It's almost as if the devastating traumatic event that must have happened there had become part of the house, like a signature in a legal document. An energy like this is not easily extinguished with the appointment of a bottle of bleach, a coat of paint, scented candles perhaps, or fragrant bouquets, as the energy has unabashedly seeped into the very fabric of the house, like a port wine stain on a wooden table that soaks right into the wood, and the only way to remove it is with a sandblaster, and even that is not guaranteed. There is something offensively creepy and uncomfortably dispiriting about the Shannon house that leaves people around this town very much on edge. And if you mention ghostly things, the locals in town will always talk about the Shannon house. I have personally witnessed firsthand how the locals in this small town always cross the opposite side of the road when they walk past the Shannon house. They will dip their chins to the pavement, increase their walking pace exponentially, and refuse to look at the house, almost as if some way, just by laying their eyes on the place, it might contaminate them with its cloying, dark, oppressive energy that the house so obviously exudes. I do know the immediate next-door neighbours, living on both sides of the Shannon house, literally keep their blinds permanently drawn. I, on the other hand, am not so lucky. I came to this small town to lay down roots, as in my own way I was running away from my old life in Atlanta, from my helicopter overbearing mother, who completely dominated my entire life and intruded so much in my personal space that sometimes I really felt like a bug in a jam jar with holes punched in the top of the jar that was being watched all the time and unable to live my life independently. Then there was a relationship I'd had with a man called Warren Peterson, which went on for 8 long-suffering, laborious years. My mother was practically begging me to marry Warren. I realized that the two of us had absolutely nothing in common, And so in a moment of absolute boldness, I ended our relationship, which was the best thing I ever did. My breakup with Warren Peterson only served to upset my mother, who described me as being ungrateful and selfish and not realizing I had a good thing when it was staring me blindingly in the face. "You're an absolute fool, Miranda," she told me. "An absolute fool. Any girl would be completely grateful to marry a man of Warren Peterson's substance and caliber. But no, you look a gift horse in the mouth, don't you? And you walk away. I'm so dreadfully disappointed in you, my girl. There really are no words. I had such high hopes for your relationship with Warren. You were so good for each other. The two of you had so much in common. But now you've blown it. The poor man is absolutely devastated that you broke up with him. He'd have given you the world, you know, and more besides if I know him. But no, you're too much of a fool to actually see it. That's what happens when you're grossly naive. Wait until you get a little older, love. You'll realize what you lost. And don't you dare come crying to me over the spilt milk that you dropped." "Mum," I retorted, "I don't love Warren. I never did. We didn't have anything in common. I don't know where you get that idea from. I did the right thing breaking up with him. It was the kindest thing to do. The only reason I stayed with him for so long is because you were piling on the pressure for us to be together. You believed he was so great for me, and I wanted to believe you were right about him. But honestly, we never connected." "How dare you, Miranda, suggest I was putting pressure on you to date Warren Peterson? Nothing could be further from the truth. I may remind you that you were the one that told me when you brought Warren home to meet me and your father, that you yourself thought you'd found the one. I was deeply cynical at the time, but Warren Peterson grew on me fast, and I realized you really had found a trooper in him. And now you just spit him out like an old piece of chewing gum, as if he means nothing to you." "You know why you liked him so much, Mum?" I snorted. "It was because he was malleable in your hands. You've always been able to tell Warren what to do, and he listens to you. God forbid if I brought a man home who stood up to you. You'd probably have a seizure on the spot, and immediately write him off as the most dreadful person you've ever had the misfortune to meet. I know what you're like, Mum, all too well." My mother snorted at me in disgust. "Look at the spiteful venom coming out of your mouth, Miranda. It really is like that of a deadly viper, if you don't mind my saying so. It's most unbecoming for a girl as pretty as yourself. Nothing you say is remotely true. I happen to like Warren Peterson because he was good for you, and you made a delightful couple together. I think you're really going to regret ending things with him." "I seriously doubt it, Mum," I said, making a face. To all intents and purposes, I certainly figured out that leaving Atlanta would help me escape my mother's toxicity. She'd really dragged me down over the years and inadvertently stolen my freedom, so I was rather like a bird in a gilded cage with clipped wings that so longed to fly away. But I couldn't because of my obvious impediments. I knew getting away from my mother and Warren Peterson was in my best interests. When I told my mother I was moving away from Atlanta, it really was the hardest thing I'd ever done in my entire life. Telling her something I knew would more than just ruffle her feathers. Ostensibly, she was absolutely livid with me for having the gumption to leave my childhood home. Let's just say I packed up all my worldly goods in the trunk of my gold SUV that didn't amount to terribly much, and I set off on a road trip to find for myself a very small town in the Pacific Northwest, where I could settle down to a brand new life. And based on my research, I had a good idea as to where that would be. I knew my new life needed to be far enough away from my mother to give me the space I needed, and to at long last acquire the independence I ravenously craved. It was my grandmother, Violet Irwin, who was my mother's mother, who was the one that gave me enough money to enjoy this new start in life. She understood how suffocated I felt under my mother's draconian reign. Granny Violet was the one that encouraged me to move away from Atlanta, to begin a new life far away from home, and at first I was somewhat reluctant to embrace her generous gift, almost as if someone was asking me to jump off a steep cliff into a deep body of dark water. And I was not completely sure whether I'd sink or swim. "It's not terribly much, love," Granny Violet said to me almost apologetically, handing me a sizable cheque. "What's this for, Granny Violet?" I asked, reading the cheque that she had given me, with a mouth that was so wide I looked as if I was trying to catch flies. I looked up at my grandmother soberly and said, "I can't possibly accept this kind of money from you, Granny Violet. It's generous of you to give me so much money, and I appreciate your magnanimous gesture. But I'm sure you need the money much more than I do." I tried to hand my grandmother back her cheque, but she insistently pushed my hand away and refused to accept it. "I can assure you, Miranda dear, I wouldn't give you a cheque if I couldn't afford to give it to you," she told me, closing my hands around the cheque so that it crumpled in my palms. "But why, Granny Violet? I don't understand," I said, looking confounded. "What is the purpose of you giving me so much money? It makes no sense. What have I done to deserve all of this?" My grandmother looked at me through grey blue eyes. "You're my granddaughter. Of course you deserve it, dear. You don't know why I'm giving you this money. Do you really mean that when you say it? Do I need to spell it out to you? I would have thought my motivations to giving you this money were obvious." "They're not to me, Granny Violet. I'm cluelessly dumb," I admitted. "You're going to have to spell out the obvious to me, I'm afraid." My grandmother sighed, as if she couldn't believe I was being so blind-sighted. "I've given you the cheque, Miranda, because I believe you need to get away from Atlanta to begin a brand new life for yourself. This money should give you some financial freedom so that you can move away and experience the luxury of what it feels like to be fully independent, without your mother completely dominating your entire life. Your mother's like a sea creature that has set up residence in your shell, pushing you out all the time. Don't get me wrong, Miranda dear. I love your mother very much indeed. She is my daughter. But even I have to admit that she's insufferable at the very best of times. And when I say that, that's me being kind. There are other words I would use to describe your mother that are less congenial, so I shan't entertain them. Let's just say your well-meaning mother has mollycoddled, bullied and controlled you all of her life, from the moment you first drew breath, and's been something for me that has been painful to watch over the years. Very painful indeed," she said, shaking her head sadly. "That's true," I admitted. "My mother has always controlled me. I'm not stupid, Granny Violet. I know exactly what she's like." "There you go, then," said Grandma Violet. "I think you know where I'm going with this, Miranda dear. Your mother has an aggressively dominating personality. She's been like this all her life. She simply takes over everything she touches. Do you know the fete they had at the church last weekend? Well, your mother took over the organizer, took charge of absolutely everything, pushed the woman out. She likes to handle everything herself in her own way and doesn't realize what she's doing to other people. It's very offensive to many of them." "I know. I heard about that," I said, hanging my head sadly. "Mum just can't help herself." "I'm sure she means well, love," said Granny Violet. "But your mother fails to understand that people need to live their own lives to make their own decisions for themselves, without her rudely butting in and taking over everything, and telling everyone how and what to do, as if it's her indomitable right. Believe me, when she was growing up as a little girl, she tried to control me back then, and I was her mother, for goodness sake." "You're kidding. She was bossing you around as a child, Granny Violet." "You bet she was, dear. When your mother was only 8 years old, she was telling me exactly what I needed to do. And guess what? I was doing everything she asked of me, without even realize I was being bullied, until one day it dawned on me that my little girl was actually controlling me. That revelation hit me hard like a baseball bat across the head." "I had no idea she was like that, Granny Violet. You never said." "Well, you don't talk about that kind of thing, do you? But anyway, let's just say your mother has always been masterfully manipulative. Very subtle about it, though. And that is why you don't even know it's happening. I know it sounds insane, but that woman really gets under your skin, and not always in a good way. I know what she's like. She's only got significantly worse over the years, I hasten to say. She's impossible. How your poor father puts up with the likes of her, I honestly don't know. When your father first got together with your mother, I joked to him. I said, I hope you know what you're getting into with my daughter. I'm not sure he actually did. I thought your father was such a good man, who deserved a whole lot better than my own daughter. But he stuck with her. When you were born, I knew how committed your father was into staying in the marriage and making things work, because he had a responsibility in taking care of you, and he was determined to do that. Now I see your mother completely controlling your father, like a vine that strangles a building until it can breathe no longer. And that's what she's done to all of us, myself included. And she's slowly but surely doing it to you.
That's a good way to put it, Granny Violet, I admitted. I do feel sorry for Dad being under Mother's thumb all the time. There were times growing up I hoped he'd divorce her, but he never did. Mummy's such a bully, and I don't think she realizes she is. She's always telling Dad what to do. Sometimes he looks so sad, rather like a tiger in a cage that is dying to escape, but quite frankly hasn't got the guts to do it. But he would if he could. My guess is he's stuck between a rock and a hard place.
Well, you've put it very eloquently, dear. That's exactly what I tend to think, said Granny Violet. Your father would probably have loved to have left your mother a long time ago, but he was so dedicated to taking care of you and being a good father to you. And now, with all these years that have gone past, I don't think he'd know what to do with himself now. It's like he's got so used to the status quo, hasn't he?
I suppose you're right. Besides, if he was to leave my mother, she wouldn't allow another woman to get their claws into Dad. She'd stalk them until they were just so afraid of her that they'd leave him well alone.
Sounds exactly what your mother would do. You echo my sentiments exactly, dear. But I rather feel like your father, that you're heading down the same path, where you're completely under your mother's formidable control. And I don't want to see that happening to you.
What do you mean, Granny Violet? I asked, bracing myself for some uncomfortable truths that I knew I was about to hear. Granny Violet again shook her head sadly.
I hate to be blatantly obvious, Miranda, but you are like a beautiful flower, growing in a flower bed that is being strangled to high heaven by all the weeds that are taking over that bed, so that the stunning, beautiful flower very slowly starts to become suffocated. It's no longer able to breathe, and slowly but surely begins to fade. The beautiful colour is the first to go, and then everything else descends into oblivion, until the beautiful flower is remembered no more, and all that is left is a burgeoning bed of unsightly weeds.
You really think I'm like that, Granny Violet? I asked, looking quite affronted that my grandmother viewed me in such a dismal light. I knew what she was saying was that, much like my father, my mother was such a dominating personality that she was practically squeezing the life out of me. And much as I hated to admit this, deep down in my gut, I knew that Granny Violet spoke the truth. Even as a child at school, my friends were always afraid of my mother, as were the teachers, because my mother used to take over absolutely everything.
Yes, I do, love, Grandma Violet said to me. I hate to say this, but I'm seeing your mother's dominating personality suck you dry like a blood-sucking leech. Look at you. You're 25 years old, for goodness sake, with your whole life ahead of you, and you're still living under your mother's thumb. She even insisted that that boyfriend of yours moved into the house with you, and was trying to push the two of you to get married, when anybody could see you were completely wrong for each other. I was very proud of you, love, for having the courage to end that relationship, even though it really upset your mother that you did so. There was no doubt in my mind she wanted to control you, and your relationship like she controls everything in your life. I could see how utterly miserable you were becoming. And things are only going to get a whole lot worse for you the longer you live under that woman's roof. She dictates everything you do, Miranda, and if you continue to live with her, your life will never ever be your own. Surely you must realize that. I shrugged my shoulders together and nodded my head. It's true. She has taken over my life. A tear slipped down my cheek, which even took me by surprise, for I hadn't expected that. My voice trembled, dropping to a whisper, as I held Grandma Violet's gaze. Sometimes, I said, my words becoming all wobbly. Sometimes I feel as if I can't breathe. Well, I'm very glad you finally admit it, love, said Granny Violet. That's a promising start. Now don't you dare cry, love. We're fixing the problem together, aren't we? The way I see it is that admitting you have a problem in the first place is going a long way to solving it. I can read your mother like a book, Miranda, but I'm sure you already know that by now. When you've lived with someone for long enough, you figure out pretty quickly what makes them tick. It's true, Granny Violet. Mum's never been able to pull the wool over your eyes. You've always had her figured out, which is probably why your relationship with her, well, it's a little tense, isn't it? You can say that again, said my grandmother with a heavy, exasperated sigh. Let's just say your mother's always been terribly transparent to me. She hates that I know what's going on in that mind of hers. I'll tell you this, the only reason she wanted you to marry the likes of Warren Peterson was because she knew she could control him. So he would do her every bidding. In the end, the two of you would end up living under her roof for the rest of your lives. Your mother would persuade you to do so. You know what she's like. And then she would be controlling her grandchildren as well. It's all part of her duplicitous plan, so to speak. Of course, she probably has no idea how conniving she actually is, because someone like that fails to see what they're really like. They think when they exercise dominance that they're showing love. If your mother had her way, you would live under her roof for the rest of your days, Miranda dear, and never leave home a single day of your life. And that's pathetic any way you look at it. A girl your age should not be living with her mother and father any more, unless, of course, circumstances dictate otherwise. There are some unfortunate young people who stay at home indefinitely, not through any choice of their own, but because they simply cannot afford to invest in the property market or rent a suitable place, so they end up staying with their parents. But you have a chance, Miranda, to move away from home for good, and you need to grab it with both hands. You'll never get another golden opportunity like this, let me tell you. I reflected very soberly on Granny Violet's words, and I knew she spoke the absolute truth. My mother really wanted me to live under her roof forever, probably with Warren Peterson at my side, along with a herd of grandchildren, that my mother would delight in ordering around, all the while deluding herself into believing that she was being unconditionally loving towards us all. We wouldn't even realize what she was doing to us. We would become like senseless insects that had been indiscriminately caught up in my mother's silken web, where she'd be feasting on us alive like an ongoing banquet that would never end, and we wouldn't even know that we were being surreptitiously eaten. You're right, Granny Violet, I admitted. Mum would like me to live with her forever, and I don't want that. I really don't. My grandmother grabbed my arm and gave it an affectionate squeeze. Of course you don't want to live the rest of your life with your parents. I mean, that's perfectly understandable. Any young woman would feel exactly the same way as you do. But that is what ultimately will happen if you don't take the bull by the horns. And that means being courageous, Miranda. Things aren't always straightforward, nor are they easy. But sometimes we have to do what we have to do. I know you love your mother very much, and you're terrified of hurting her feelings and causing her offense. But when, you have to ask yourself this, Miranda, has she been concerned about hurting your feelings? She doesn't care about hurting my feelings, I admitted. She doesn't really care about my feelings. She only cares about her own feelings. Well, there you go again. I make my point very clear, don't I? What I want you to do is I want you to look at your life very dispassionately through a lens. Look at yourself as if you're viewing a stranger and her life. And ask yourself, after viewing your life through a stranger's eyes, what advice you would give that stranger if you were wearing her shoes. Think about it like that for a second. Well, I would tell her to get the hell away from her mother and to start living her authentic life without her mother always butting in. Well, there you go, dear. You've answered your own question. You know exactly what you need to do. But you know what, Granny Violet? What is it, dear? I'm just worried. I'm just worried that I don't have the guts to do anything. I'm afraid of leaving Mum. I'm afraid of being on my own. I'm afraid of being independent. I'm fearful of almost everything. But of course, dear, you need to understand that that is how you will invariably feel. For you haven't had much life experience, have you? But you also need your space, and that is important. Your mother wants you to naively believe that you can't manage without her, that you're dependent on her for your every need. But none of that is remotely true, and you must realize that, surely. You need your independence, Miranda. I can't stress that enough. Look how fearful you are, Miranda. That's not natural for a woman of your young age. Most young people want to reach for the stars. They've got exciting plans for their future. But you are reluctant to step forward into the world of the unknown, which is exactly what you need to do. For your own good, you need to move away from Atlanta. I've got faith in you that you can make a brand new start for yourself, Miranda. And take it from me, it'll be the best, wisest, most sensible decision that you ever made. And one day you'll thank me for persuading you to leave. As in moving away, you will find yourself. But I'm not sure I can do it, Granny Violet. I know you must think I'm such a wuss, and I probably am. But it scares me half to death to move away from everything that I've known. I'm terrified as well about how Mum will react when I tell her I'm leaving. She'll likely think, think World War III has erupted or something. I'm also afraid of beginning again. I haven't got your kind of courage, Granny Violet. Nonsense, child. You are talking nonsense. You've got a great deal of courage. Only you don't know it yet. Don't you see what your mother has done to you? Over these years, in monopolizing every single aspect of your life, she wants you to believe that without her, you are nothing, which is far from the truth. My guess is without her, you will flourish like a tree in spring that suddenly bursts into blossom. You're just going to open up, and you're just going to find yourself, Miranda, and that's very, very exciting. Your mother is going to be rather begrudging when she realizes you want to move away. But you need to do so, love. It's in your best interests. And even though at first you might be reluctant to dive into the deep end, I know when you do, you will swim and not drown. You're a survivor, Miranda. I've always known that about you. You really think I'm a survivor, Granny Violet? I asked gingerly, doubting that I had any kind of survival instinct, because my mother throughout my life had taken ownership of everything, like artificial intelligence taking over a human brain, in a manner of speaking. Of course you're a survivor, Miranda, my dear. Don't you dare doubt that for a single second. Unfortunately, we both know your mother has always controlled the reins of your life. But that is about to change. Well, if I have anything to do with it. But you need to break free from her formidable clutches, love. I'm an old woman. I'm not getting much younger. But advancing age has two intrinsic benefits. It makes you wise and discerning. So I know what I'm talking about. And if I've learnt anything in my long life, that is that everybody needs to have their own space. It's terribly, terribly important, you know. And to be the person that God ordained them to be. And that will never happen for you, under your mother's hawk-like watch. Not when she controls every aspect of your life. rather like a puppet on a string. I knew Granny Violet spoke the truth. There was an unbridled part of myself that really wanted to break free from my mother's doggedly resistant clutches, rather like a wild stallion that has been cooped up in a stable for far too long, and is desirous to bring the stable door crashing down with its powerful hooves just to get away, as it knows the green wild pastures are so much better than the four walls of the stall that shut it away from the world. I was like that stallion. I wanted to be free. By all accounts, the cheque that Granny Violet had given me, although it wasn't a huge amount of money, it was still life-changing for me. I would have the quintessential, enviable opportunity to be able to leave home for good, now that I had been liberated financially. Granny Violet had given me enough money to buy something reasonably modest, that I would have the luxury of calling my own. I realized very suddenly that I wanted to do just that. The idea of leaving home sounded like an irresistible temptation that I would be a fool to refuse. I would finally be free to live my own life as I so wished, without being dictated to by my mother, who had her own ideas about how I should live my life. I knew Granny Violet was right. The longer I lived under my mother's influences, the harder it would be to leave home. For my flailing confidence would likely over time become more and more fractured and fragile, and as a result I would invariably start doubting my ability to be able to live on my own, without being tied to my mother's apron strings. I had started up my own online business a couple of years back, as my mother had artfully persuaded me not to go to university or college. "You don't want to do that, love," she assured me, in a firm, no-nonsense tone of voice that I had never challenged, for my mother could be exceedingly intimidating. "College and university are far too overrated, and when people leave those places, they may have gained some academic advantages, I'll give you that, but truly their worldly wisdom is sorely lacking. Why don't you start up your own business from home? A lot of young entrepreneurs do just that, and in my humble opinion it makes a whole lot of sense. Look at your father, for example. He's a great inspiration, is he not? He's been working from home for years and years, and running a successful, very profitable business. You'd be wise to follow his salient example, dear, and do much the same." What my mother had said to me at the time made a whole lot of sense, for I didn't have any particular aspirations to go to college or university, because I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. But now, as I look back through the lens of time, I realize that my mother didn't want me to associate with other students my own age, in case their influential persuasions might encourage me to leave home, which is the last thing my mother wanted. She liked to have some level of control over me, rather like a puppet on a string, and that influence would become a lot weaker if I was in a university or college, I suppose. Despite everything, hand on heart, I absolutely have no regrets at all that I never went to college or university. I enjoyed being creatively inspired to build my online business, where I would make dog toys, all kinds of dog beds in different sizes, and steps for dogs, for little dogs in order to climb up onto their owners' beds to sleep at night. I also made all manner of designer dog coats that were suitable for all seasons of the year. And by word of mouth my online business was beginning to make a reasonable profit. I had always been extremely good with my hands, and from the age of 10 my mother had taught me how to work a sewing machine, and I was making all kinds of designer creations with an impassioned enthusiasm. My business had got to a fine start, although my mother had insisted I gave her most of the money I earned to put towards the rent, and of course some bizarre saving scheme that she said would benefit me in 30 years' time, which I didn't dare question her about. It was clearly apparent to me my mother wanted to control all the money. She had always done so in our house. Even the money that my father earned was all under her strict control. I was never going to be able to have enough free-flowing cash available to me in order for me to leave home, so I understood what she was doing. It was not that she wanted my money, But if she took charge of everything I earned and put all the excesses of my income into a savings account that I couldn't touch for 20 years or so, it meant I would never have the opportunity to leave home, to buy my own place, which is exactly what my mother had masterfully ordained. With Granny Violet's cheque, that all changed. I now had the freedom of choice. If I were to live alone in my own home, my mother would no longer have control over my life. And the thought of that made me feel free, as if I could finally breathe again, as if I'd grown a pair of wings and was going to be able to fly away for the very first time in my life. And although leaving the nest where I'd roosted for so long, that I'd called home, was very daunting and somewhat scary, I knew if I didn't leave now, I would become exactly like my father had become, completely locked under my mother's indomitable spell. Granny Violet smiled at me warmly. Her grey eyes were the colour of dirty ice. They were so beguiling, but they suddenly looked melancholic and reflectful. "I'm going to miss you, Miranda. I really am. I have loved having my only granddaughter living 2 doors away from me on the street. But we can stay in touch, speak to each other regularly. I know the money I've given you is not all that much. I would have liked to have given you a whole lot more, but it's enough for you to buy a small little house somewhere that you can enjoy as your own. I will rest easier in my heart, seeing you're no longer enslaved by your mother's draconian control." "But Granny Violet, what am I going to say to Mum? She'll never let me leave. You know how dogmatic and bloody-minded she can be. She'll find a way to stop me from going. I know she will. You know as well as I do what she's like." "She has no power or authority over you, my dear. You're a grown-up woman now, Miranda, an individual in your own right. You are perfectly entitled to make your own choices in life, and there's not a damn thing your mother can do about it. Provided, of course, Miranda, that you have the nerve to stand up to her. And you know what, girl? I believe you do." "But what will I say to her, Granny Violet? Just thinking about telling her I'm leaving is freaking me the hell out. She ain't going to take the news lying down, is she?" "You tell her the truth, love. In my experience, telling the truth is the best thing to do. Tell her that you want to live in a lovely little rural town in a pretty little house somewhere, while you run your own boutique pet business from home, making dog things for your exclusive online boutique. Tell her you want a fresh change of scene, away from Atlanta, so to speak, and that like other girls of your age, you want some much-deserved independence. Of course she will bully you to change your mind, of that I'm in no doubt. But you mustn't fall for her cunning little traps. We both know exactly what she's like, and how unscrupulously domineering she can be. You're going to have to be tough, Miranda, tougher than you've ever been in your entire life. And I know that that is not going to be easy for you. I urge you not to allow your mother to manipulate or intimidate you. If I know your mother, she'll make you feel guilty for abandoning her and moving away. She will try anything to stop you in your endeavours. She'll likely bring on the waterworks. She's very good with the crocodile tears, you know. So you feel desperately bad about leaving. Believe me, she'll pull any emotional string at her disposal to get you to do her bidding. She's cunning like that. She wants you to surrender to her demands. She won't want you to leave under any circumstances if she can possibly prevent you from doing so. So she will try every artful trick in the book to get you to surrender to her charge." "So what do I do, Granny Violet, to get her to listen to me?" I asked.
"You need to put down your foot, love, for the very first time in your life, and you're going to have to stand up to your mother. I know it's hard, but you've got to do it. You can tell her I've given you some money and encouraged you to make a brand new start for yourself by moving away to pastures green. She will in no doubt lose it with me, but I'm used to your mother's shenanigans. She's a thorn in the side that I've learnt to manage over the years."
"Thank you, Granny Violet," I said, tears of gratitude streaming down my cheeks, which I quickly wiped away. "I've always wanted to leave home, but I've never expressed the clandestine feelings out loud, Granny Violet. until you've given me the courage and opportunity to do just that. And you know what, Granny Violet? I'm going to do it, I said with a resolute, unflinching determination that surprised even me. The idea of finally being released from my mother's vice-like stranglehold over my life had suddenly become irresistible. I knew that I would do exactly as Granny Violet had instructed me to do, no matter how much my mother protested and tried to persuade me to stay. Even if she did cry those crocodile tears, I would not fall victim to any of her insidious tricks. I could taste freedom, rather like a fragrant bouquet on the wind, and the more I smelt it, the more I wanted it for myself, like I've never wanted anything more in my life before. I'd be damned if my mother would take this away from me. I'd fight for my independence with every last breath, because now I craved it more than ever. Ostensibly growing up, I had envied all my girlfriends, whose parents' attitudes had both been carefree and relaxed, while my mother had been tortuously controlling. She had always butted into every single aspect of my young life. She had never allowed me to go on school camping trips, or even to friends' birthday parties, unless I was chaperoned by her. She described herself as just being a protective mother, but she was so much more than that, and everybody knew it. Thanks to Granny Violet's intervention and generous check, freedom was only a hair's breadth away, and I was going to grab it with both hands. I certainly didn't want to become the weirdo that was still living with my mother when I was in my late 50s. And let's just say after my mother was long since deceased, I would still probably be living on my own, becoming a complete loner, living in solitary isolation, and I didn't want that for myself. Every night in our household we had a formal dinner, as my mother was old-fashioned in that regard, performing old-fashioned rituals that had passed many by in my generation, but not my mother, who hung on to old-fashioned values and traditions with a cast-iron grip. We were expected to dress formally for dinner every night, where a delicious 3-course meal would be served, that my mother had painstakingly cooked, and to give her credit, she was an excellent cook. My mother had learned to cook masterfully when she was much younger, having attended a year's cordon bleu cookery course in England, paid for at great expense by Granny Violet herself. The white Georgian house in the Berkshire countryside, where my mother acquired these skills, back in the day, was highly esteemed, and many of the people on her cookery course were associated with British aristocracy, so maybe that was why my mother was so ritualistic in her die-hard habits. My mother would always sit at the head of the table with my father on her left-hand side, so no surprises for guessing who wore the trousers in our household. It was over dinner that evening that I bravely but somewhat gingerly let the cat out of the bag, if not a little reluctantly, and before I could control myself, the words popped out of my mouth, as I told my mother my earth-shattering news, that I rather suspected was going to go down with her like a lead balloon. It would seem my silent deductions were not wrong. I knew I had to tell her I was leaving in a couple of days' time, so there really was no time like the present. I could not prolong my agony with procrastination of any kind, so the words I spoke seamlessly rolled off my tongue, tumbling over each other in their eagerness to escape. I realized in this poignant moment I was actually holding my fork and knife so tightly that my knuckles were showing, as yes, I admit I was bracing myself for the impact of my mother's reaction, for I was not entirely sure how she would react to my news, but I was about to find out. "I'll be leaving Atlanta in a couple of days' time. I'm moving away for good," I said with a firm conviction. "I know it's not what you want to hear, Mum, but you won't be able to change my mind." I don't remember a time I've ever spoken to my mother in such a decisive tone of voice, but Granny Violet had persuaded me to be assertive with my intentions, and that was what I was doing. My mother was shuffling a piece of potato on her plate, which she had viciously stabbed with her fork, and subsequently popped into her mouth. She seemed to intimidate everything in her life, including the food on her plate. As my words were released into the ether, rather like a noxious, suffocating gas that steals away all the oxygen, all was silent for a while in the dining room, as my mother began to chew very fast, and as a consequence very nearly choked over the piece of potato that she had nastily beheaded with her fork. My mother never spoke when her mouth was full, because that was far too impolite, but her hawk-like dark brown eyes grew unreasonably round with horror. Once my mother had swallowed the piece of potato, her words pierced the unsettled atmosphere around the dining-room table with a fierce, no-nonsense firmness that could easily have shattered glass. "What on earth are you talking about, Miranda? Please say that again, won't you? I'm quite sure I misheard what you were saying. For a dreadful moment I thought you were saying you were leaving us. Silly me," she said, letting out a stiff laugh. "You wouldn't walk out on me and your father, would you, Miranda? I mean, that would be a truly selfish, self-centered thing for you to do. And you're a good person, aren't you? You'd never treat me and your father with so much disdain, would you, dear? Not after everything I've done for you over these years. That would be a wretchedly insensitive thing for you to do. But you know that, don't you, dear?" My father was a quiet man by nature, and extremely good-looking for a man approaching his 50s, which was amazing, given you would think he would have withered up like a dried old prune, given he'd been under my mother's formidable thumb for so many years. He had a full head of grey hair that only served to accentuate the grey-blue colour of his eyes. The strange thing about my father was he looked more distinguished than ever, much more so than he'd done in his 20s. As rather like a mature wine, he had almost certainly improved with age. At my unexpected announcement, my father looked up from his dinner plate with a bewildered, nonplussed expression on his face, almost as if he couldn't quite believe what I'd just said. In truth, had he had a piece of potato in his mouth, I'm absolutely certain he would have choked on it. My father's well-manicured fingers twitched rather nervously as he reached out for a glass tumbler and quickly chugged down some water in a self-soothing gesture, drinking almost all of the water in a single gulp. All the while his nervous eyes pinned directly on my mother, as he waited with bated breath to hear her reaction to my impromptu remarks, which he knew would be like throwing petrol onto a bundle of dry twigs. He was probably wondering whether a fiery explosion was about to go off in any second around our dining-room table, and whether my mother would suddenly erupt into a dazzling glaze of furious colours, rather like a Catherine wheel on the 4th of July. I sat up erect against my mother's sumptuously upholstered dining-room chair, and repeated myself again, so that my mother could not conveniently claim she had misheard me. My eyes were fixed steadily on my mother, so that she could see how sincere I was in what I was saying. "I told you, Mum. It's simple. I'm moving away from home. I'm leaving on Wednesday, to be exact. I'm sorry it's such short notice for you. I'm leaving Atlanta for good. I've got my eye on a charming town in the Pacific Northwest, where I'd like to lay down roots and start a brand new life for myself. I need a change of scene, and I want to move somewhere peaceful, where I'm surrounded by the natural world. I'm tired of living in a big bustling city, and you know me, I've always been drawn to nature. If you remember, even as a child, I preferred to be playing out of doors, mucking around in the dirt with the earthworms, than playing with my dolls inside." "But you can't just up and leave like that," said my mother abruptly. "Besides anything else, you don't have the finances to leave. Where would you live anyway? Who would cook for you or take care of your laundry?" "I do have the money to buy my own place, Mum," I said. "And for your information, I'm perfectly capable of doing my own cooking and my own laundry. If you must know, Granny Violet gave me a generous cheque to buy my own little place, where I can run my online pet boutique business from home, in an idyllic location, so to speak. It'll be a fresh start for me, Mum. I've lived here for so long. I'm sure the two of you must have had enough of me by now. I've been living under your roof for 25 years, for goodness sake. I need a little independence, don't I? You have to admit, Mum, most girls my age have long since moved away from home. Some are independently working. Others might even be married. I intend to follow in their footsteps. Unlike me, though, I expect they'd choose a bustling city like New York over a small town any day of the week." My mother's face grew red with indignation. This time it was her fingers that appeared to be shaking, as she reached out for her wine goblet and unsteadily drank a couple of sips of the red Merlot. All the while her beady eyes were fixed on me, rather like a hawk over a deadly carcass it very much wanted to devour. Say that again, Miranda dear, because I think I must have grown very hard of hearing over this dinner table tonight. Either that, or I don't appreciate a word that you're saying. Are you telling me that Granny Violet, my ever so interfering mother, put this preposterous, insane idea into your head for you to leave your home here in Atlanta that you share with me and your father? I can't believe Granny Violet. She has the blatant audacity to give you a check to buy your own house with. How dare she intrude in our lives like this, and fill your head up with so much absurd nonsense? Who on earth does she think she is, trying to encourage you to leave home like this? Wait until I have words with her. You're not moving away. Do you understand, Miranda? And that's final. You're going to remain here with me and your father, which is exactly where you belong. This is your home, Miranda, and you simply cannot leave. I refuse to let you. Mum, as I was saying 2 seconds ago, when you deliberately tried not to listen to a word I said, I'm 25 years old. I'm not a baby anymore. I've enjoyed living with the both of you in my family home, but I need my own space and independence now. I love you both very much indeed, and I'm grateful for everything you've done for me over the years. But I have to have a new beginning, a fresh start. It's nothing personal, Mum, so don't take offence with what I'm saying. But I need to do this for myself, for my growth as a human being. Surely you can understand that. I'll come and visit you both as often as I can, and we can chat as often as possible, frequently if you like. You say you're grateful, Miranda, do you? What poppycock? Said my mother, allowing a big frown to drag her thin lips downwards into an ugly, unflattering scowl. If you were remotely grateful, you would show some appreciation and gratitude, would you not? But you don't do that, do you? You selfishly want to abandon me and your father like this. How could you do this to us? It's dreadfully self-centred of you. Tell her, Stephen, will you? She said, turning around to look directly at my father. Tell her not to do this to us. Tell her she can't leave us in the lurch like this. My mother's voice was pleading as she turned around to my father for some kind of response, for she naturally expected my father to support her, as he devotedly usually did. My father took a bite of his potato, chewing it slowly, if not rather uncomfortably. I suspected this was deliberate, so he could align himself very carefully with what he would say to my mother, while she impatiently waited for his response. My father surprised me by standing up to my mother, which was something he never normally did, but I think he realized that it really was rather ridiculous that at 25 I was still living at home with them. And the only reason that this was actually the case was because of my mother's fierce, indomitable stranglehold over my life. I'm not going to tell Miranda not to do this, sweetheart, my father said, as tactfully and diplomatically as he possibly could. That would be absolutely insane. Miranda here is absolutely right in everything she has just said. She's a grown woman with a mind of her own. She's 25 years old, is she not? She's right. She shouldn't be living under our roof, should she? She should be out there like any other young lady her age, enjoying life and living independently of us. It's not for us to tell her what to do. We don't legally have a monopoly over her life any more. She is not a little girl any longer. She's a grown-up woman with a mind of her own, and you need to realize that, love. I know it's very hard for you, as being a mother with only one child that is all grown up. You're naturally very protective over Miranda, but we as her parents cannot dictate what our grown-up daughter does or does not do. That would not be fair. It wouldn't be right, nor would it be legal. There are parents out there who watch their grown-up children doing things that make their hair curl, but they know they cannot interfere in their children's lives. Miranda has made us both extremely proud, and her expressed desire to leave and move away should be encouraged and positively celebrated. My mother glared at my father through furious, defiant eyes that burned with a fiery rage. So that is it? Is that right, Stephen? You're going to side with Miranda, are you, on this? I might have known you'd be disloyal to me. Silly me for thinking you'd actually support me as your wife. Oh, I can't believe you. I just cannot believe you. I know who to come to when I need someone to stand up for me, Stephen. And it's certainly not my own husband, that's for sure. Look, sweetheart, this is not about taking anyone's side. This is about being pragmatic, reasonable, logical. Look around you. Young women of Miranda's age do not remain indefinitely living with their parents, unless, of course, circumstances dictate otherwise, and those circumstances are more often than not financial. Most parents do want their children to leave the nest, to live lives that are productive on their own. For many like yourself, it's not easy to see their children leave the nest, but they need to let it happen. Most parents want their children to be successful and prosper in their lives. It's how the world works, love. I'll have you know, Stephen, I'm not your average parent. I happen to be a very responsible mother that cares about my daughter very much. And as for being reasonable, I don't think you know the meaning of the word reasonable, Stephen. My mother snorted. I'm very disappointed in you, Stephen, for being so vindictively treasonous towards me. Look at everything I've done for the both of you over the years. You should both be ashamed of yourselves. And as for you, Miranda, is this your callously brutal way of paying me back for all my kindness I've shown to you, as such a devoted mother, always putting your needs above my own? Oh, I can't believe it. And as for you, Stephen, taking Miranda's side on this, I feel extremely betrayed by you, Stephen. Do you know, I think I'd have actually preferred if I'd found out if you'd been cheating on me with another woman, than betraying me over the dinner table like this in the way that you've done tonight. And at that, my mother lifted up her goblet of Merlot and threw it directly at my father, so the red wine splashed all over his face and his shirt. My father stared back at my mother in bemusement, his brows knitting together into a deep furrow. You deserve that, Stephen, for your treachery towards me, said my mother, storming out of the dining room and slamming the door behind her, leaving both me and my father sitting alone at the table together, while red wine trickled down my father's face, rather like red raindrops on a window pane. Well, that went down awfully well, didn't it? Said my father sarcastically, wiping down the droplets of red wine from his face with a starched linen table napkin. Your mother's in a right old bad mood, is she not? I suspect your announcement set her off. She's not remotely happy that you're leaving home, Miranda. But it is what it is, and the sooner she accepts it, the better. What on earth did the woman expect? I knew sooner or later you'd flee the nest, but your mother would never entertain the thought. She wouldn't dare. Sometimes that woman refuses to live in the real world. Thanks, Dad. I really appreciate that you stuck up for me. It couldn't have been easy. How do you feel about me going? Well, I think you've made a very good decision. You need your independence, love. And for the record, I'm glad that Granny Violet has given you the money to leave. I would have done the same if your mother didn't monopolise all the purse strings in this household. Let's just say if your mother had seen a sizable amount of money being drawn from our bank account that she realised I'd given to you for the purposes of buying your own place, she'd have practically had kittens. She sure would have, I agreed. In my case, I have to keep the belligerently capricious cat, which of course is your mother, purring happily all the time, he said, giving me a wink. Better that than having my eyes scratched out, he joked. I've been worried about your mother getting her pincers into you, Miranda, never allowing you to leave home. She means well, of course she does. But sometimes her kind of overly possessive love can be insufferable, to say the very least. Believe me, I know firsthand all about it. Thanks, Dad, I said, getting up from the table and giving him a warm hug. I hasten to say, when I did manage to leave my bereft mother behind, along with the life I'd lived in Atlanta for over 25 years, I felt both excited and exhilarated, more so than I'd done for a very long time, for I knew that this would be a brand new beginning for me, and getting away from home was far more liberating for me than it probably would be for other young people of my age, who had likely not been subjected to the influences of a very dominating mother. To all intents and purposes, on this intrepid exploratory road trip of mine, I chose to investigate the quaint little rural town that I'd actively researched online at great length. For some reason I was inexplicably drawn to this place, as something about the enchanting historic old world town, with its small friendly populace, really appealed to me. The moment I arrived here, I just knew unequivocally that this was where I'd like to lay down roots, although I noticed that the houses in the street I really liked were very steep in price. Even though all these years later, now that I look back, I can honestly say I don't know why I was so serendipitously drawn to this town, but I'm inclined to believe that sometimes a place chooses you, rather than you choose a place, although as the buyer of a place, you ultimately would dismiss this way of thinking out of hand. But something had definitely propelled me to buy the house I chose to live in, and of course to live in this beautiful but very unusual town. One of the first things I fully appreciated about this delightful small town was how peaceful and agreeably slow-paced the lifestyle was, compared to the bustling, boomy vibe of a metropolis such as Atlanta, where adrenaline fuels the heartbeat of the city, so that everybody ultimately rushes around on a roller coaster ride from dawn to dusk, rather like a hamster on its wheel. The vibrant countryside swaddled the town on every side, so that the wild animals that lived in these parts became part of the scenery, and it really wasn't uncommon to see deer hanging around on the sides of the roads, seemingly unafraid of the human inhabitants of this small town. As a person who naturally gravitates towards the great outdoors and loves riding a mountain bike, nothing could be better than exploring the scenery around here, where there were so many exciting walking trails on offer. All these heartwarming things made me feel that at long last I had arrived at my forever home. Unlike other young people my age, who invariably leave their small towns to seek out the exciting opportunities a booming metropolis might obviously inspire, I was doing things the other way around, and running away from the thriving heartbeat of a big city to a much more gentler pace of life, where you could be forgiven for getting up a little later in the morning, or taking your time to enjoy a delicious lunch, without being rudely dictated to by the hands of a clock. Maybe my life had been so oppressed up to now, living under my mother's formidable thumb, so living in a big metropolis like Atlanta would not be much different. So escaping to the countryside was the best thing I ever did. I think many locals were naturally surprised to see a young person such as myself moving into their small-town rural neighbourhood, a woman who had willfully chosen to abandon the sophisticated allure of a charismatic city, if you can call it that, with its fancy wine bars and effervescent nightlife. But I was happy to give all that a miss, for in my mind's eye I was certainly gaining and not losing at all. There were only 2 decent-sized houses in a price range that I could actually afford, situated on one of the town's most historic streets. Both these houses for sale overlooked each other. When I began my ambitious house-hunting expedition, I hasten to say there were other places in this small town I could more easily afford, but such places were so tiny there was hardly enough space in them to swing a cat, and they held little allure for me, for most of these small houses were pretty nondescript and rather unexciting. The 2 more substantially sized houses that I was looking for on this highly desirable sought-after street where I really wanted to live were miraculously against all the odds within my budget, and were both extravagantly swathed in a rich flamboyant history going all the way back to the Victorian times. One of the houses I was due to be shortly shown around by an estate agent was called the Shannon House. The other house that was for sale happened to overlook the Shannon House. I do recall when I drove up to both houses with their for sale signs pitched in front of them, both on opposite sides of the street, I took one look at the Shannon House and physically squirmed. Much like the rest of the houses in the street, the Shannon House was distinctly Victorian. It had a steep pitched gable roof and was much more sizable than the rest of the houses in the street. It was framed in the furthest distance by a rambling woodland oasis of tall lofty trees that stretched back for quite a distance, with trails that were open for hikers to use. The Shannon house had spiky-looking turrets, a broad wraparound porch, and a grey stone facade. But it looked so miserably austere, so ominously uninviting, so much so that it sent a nasty prickle down my spine. I observed wild burgeoning vines and creepers growing up the grey stone walls, while the bay windows of the sizable 3-story house stared back at me vacuously, rather like the empty, soulless sockets of a dead man's skull. The house would likely have been a desirable property back in its time, for it appeared structurally sound. It would not have been nearly so bad if it wasn't for the awful tenebrific energy the house so obviously exuded, that made it so sinister. Indeed, the hostile house reminded me of a grieving widow, wearing sackcloth and ashes, whose husband had gone off on a long voyage out to sea, and had never returned home, so the woman indulged in her grief, refusing to ever wear colour again, or even put a smile on her face, as such was her lugubrious melancholia. When I looked at the Shannon house, my bones practically rattled inside me, like that of an old woman. I will say this, I have never known a house to have such a powerful effect on me, but the reaction I had to the Shannon house was so incredibly profound. It really was like being suddenly stung by a bee and having an allergic reaction. So in that quintessential moment, I knew I would not set foot in the Shannon house, not even for a quick appraisal with the estate agent, for the place absolutely repelled me. The estate agent responsible for showing me around both properties was a very agreeable, gentle-natured young woman called Pamela Freeman. She was a far cry from the money-grabbing estate agents in my part of the world, who are practically drooling to get a house off their hands so that their commission checks can come rolling in, like the seasonal rain every year. On seeing me arrive in my gold-coloured SUV, that I'd parked opposite the Shannon house, Pamela Freeman jumped out of her car and waved at me enthusiastically. She possessed that friendly small-town charm I found very endearing, and immediately put me at ease. She was dressed in a blue and red outfit that made her look rather like an air hostess, especially as her long brown hair was pinned back in a neat little bun, and she was reasonably tall. Seconds later, the tall, lanky brunette was tapping on my window, which I pulled down to greet her with a warm smile on my face. "Hello, you must be Miranda Hoffman," she said to me, leaning in to look at me through the window. "That's right," I said, climbing out of my car and shaking the woman's hand. "My name is Pamela Freeman," she said to me, "but please call me Pam. Everybody does around here. I understand you're interested in laying down roots in our small town. And the house I'm showing you, well, both the houses I'm showing you around today are both within your budget. And this is the town's most famous street, for all the houses around here are Victorian and are steeped in a rich history, and very well preserved, I have to say. Everybody has maintained the houses on this street extremely well. I understand you spoke to my colleague Dennis Fairweather on the phone a couple of days ago, expressing a very keen interest in buying a house on this street. Is that right?" "That's right," I said. "He did tell me you'd be showing me around the place, but he said that most of the houses on the street were well over my budget, with of course the exception of the two you're planning to show me around today," I said rather cautiously. "Good then, we're both on the same page. My colleague was telling you that this is the most famous street in our small town, and he's right about that. He's also right that the two properties I'm going to show you today are very affordable because the prices have been slashed significantly. Other houses on this street are very expensive, I'm afraid. But these ones that I'm going to show you around today are within your price range. Both of them are for sale. I'll be perfectly straight with you, Miss Hoffman. The Shannon house over there, the house with the grey stone walls and the large bay windows." "What about it?" I asked. Pamela Freeman pulled in a deep breath and straightened her back quite substantially, so she appeared even taller than she really was. "Well, it's got a bit of a reputation, I'm afraid, if you know what I mean," she said rather coyly. "No, what do you mean?" I asked. Pamela Freeman dropped her voice to a muted whisper, almost as if she was afraid that someone was listening in to our conversation. "Well, some people say it's haunted," but she chuckled. "I don't believe in such things for a single second. I've never actually been the superstitious type. But here in a small town such as this, Let's just say many of the folk around here are exceedingly superstitious, and so stories can get a tad out of hand, if you know what I mean, and probably become insanely exaggerated. I do, however, assure you, Miss Hoffman, the Shannon house is structurally sound. It's a very well-built Victorian home, if not a little bit menacing on the outside, and that tends to intimidate some folk. But my bet is that if time, money and energy is invested in the property, it could easily lose its gloomy appearance and actually become a much sought-after property on this street. Why do people around here believe it's haunted? I asked. Is it because it looks as if it belongs on America's most haunted website? I teased. Let's just say the moment I saw the house, it gave me quite the chills. Really, said Pam, raising a very arched, perfectly manicured brow. It's interesting you should say that. You're not alone in feeling this way. A lot of people experience similar feelings to yours when they lay their eyes on the Shannon house for the very first time. People tend to react to the house in different ways. Some love it. Others say the house actually makes their blood go as cold as ice. Many feel as if they're being watched. When it was last put up for sale, I cannot tell you how many viewers just got into their cars and drove off, refusing even to look around the house, because they felt it was so foreboding, and they believed something terrible had happened there. And are they right? I asked. Did something terrible happen? In the house, I mean. I'm afraid the Shannon house is steeped in a rather depressing history, said Pamela, and not a good one at that, I'm afraid. I so wish I could say differently. If I could, the place would sell for a fortune, let me tell you. When you say depressing history, what do you mean by that? I asked. Well, some people believe that houses carry energy signatures, don't they? And if something traumatic happened in a home, the house will naturally absorb that energy. People are sensitive to immediately tuning into that kind of thing, if you know what I mean. So something traumatic did happen in the Shannon house? I asked. Well, it's a long story, but every local that lives in town is extremely well versed on the house's history. You can't live in this town and not know about the Shannon house. Furthermore, many of the locals are convinced it's the ghost of Darcy Shannon that roams the house at the dead of night, and that she is solely responsible for kicking out any new homeowners shortly after they move in, for nobody stays at the Shannon house for longer than about 6 months before they up and leave, always very suddenly. Really? That's intriguing, I said. Pamela nodded. Let's just say some people in these parts swear they've seen the ghost of Darcy in the windows of the Shannon house, staring out onto the street when the house is not occupied. But I've always taken such fanciful allegations with a pinch of salt, so to speak. I will only believe in something if I see it for myself. But I've been showing people around the Shannon house for over 5 years now, and never once have I experienced something paranormal on the property. By all accounts, small towns such as this are notorious for their ghost stories, aren't they? But folk around here are resolutely convinced that the Shannon house is definitely haunted. They believe by the angry female ghost of Darcy Shannon herself. So what did happen at the Shannon house? I asked, my curiosity almost certainly getting the better of me. I suppose I shouldn't ask you, because I have no intention of buying the place or even looking around it, but I am intrigued. You're not alone. Everybody's intrigued and curious about the Shannon house. I might as well tell you the story, said Pamela, shrugging her shoulders rather nonchalantly. If you don't hear it from me, someone else in town will tell you it. I'm in no doubt of that. In the 1800s, a woman by the name of Darcy Shannon, who was mentally unstable, lived in the Shannon house with her husband Abraham. The doctors believe she belonged in a mental asylum. She was delusional and had all kinds of mental conditions, like schizophrenia and God knows what else. Well, that's what it's alleged anyway. She'd become extremely manic from time to time, and when she became unhinged, she'd start self-harming herself by slashing her wrists on several occasions, and very nearly succeeded in killing herself, I have to say. Darcy's husband, Abraham Shannon, was naturally very worried about institutionalizing his beloved wife, because he was very much in love with her, and when he'd married her she had been of sound mind. It was only months after the wedding that she suddenly became completely wacko. It wasn't uncommon back in the day, when people were displaying mental abnormalities, for such people to be institutionalized in some kind of mental asylum. Really? I said. I had no idea about that. I'm afraid so. It was commonplace back then, Pam admitted. Abraham worried profusely about what being institutionalized would mean for his wife Darcy. He had seen firsthand how abysmally people were treated in insane asylums by the staff that worked there. He didn't want his wife to experience such cruel treatment in the hands of these healthcare providers, who were very abusive towards their patients and treated them with abysmal disdain. Sometimes the nursing staff would leave patients soaked in their own feces and urine, so it was hardly sanitary, and if patients got out of hand, they'd be locked away in the dungeons beneath the building for days at a time. Darcy's devoted husband decided to keep his wife in a locked bedroom upstairs, rather than trust the healthcare providers in the sanatorium to look after her. He'd put a chain on her feet during the day, so she would not be able to harm herself, as she couldn't escape the confines of her bedroom, or get her hands on anything sharp that she could use on herself. You may think what he did was cruel, but it was a whole lot better than anything she might have experienced in a mental asylum, where they willfully ignored the needs of their patients most of the time. It was said that Darcy was enraged by her husband treating her like a caged animal, but what she failed to appreciate was that everything he was doing was out of his love for her and his need to protect her. People would walk down the street and hear her shrieking and screaming at the top of her lungs. It caused many of the locals living here much disquiet. So many of them begged Abraham Shannon to send his wife to a mental asylum, for she was disrupting the peace in this tranquil street. Sometimes at night her screams could be heard for miles around. They said she sounded like a rabid wild animal. Of course Abraham Shannon refused to listen to their well-meaning advice. He really believed he could take care of his wife adequately himself. I immediately cupped my hands over my mouth in horror. "That's dreadful! To be locked up all day with a chain on your foot. I can't imagine what that must have been like for the poor woman. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Please go on. This is one hell of a story." "It sure is," Pamela agreed. "Well, one day Darcy managed to get free from her husband's chains. No one knows exactly how she managed to do this. Finally, he came into the bedroom one night to bring her evening meal. Her dinner was on a tray. She knocked it out of his hands so that it all went flying around the room, and the china plates broke. Darcy became frenziedly manic. She aggressively pounced on her husband Abraham. Rather like an untamed wild animal, she held him down and beat him up with her fists. When she became like this, some say she was as strong as an ox. She then threw her husband out of her bedroom window from the 3rd floor, which was a substantial drop. His head hit the stone slab below, so he died on impact. Moments later, Darcy, who had become as manic as a wild animal, and was quite literally foaming at the mouth and roaming the house at will. It was in the kitchen she found a sharp knife in a drawer, and used it to slash her wrists, and with her own blood she wrote all over the walls in the house, in a language that was later verified to be Latin. The words "necker" were written on the wall, and that means kill. There was another word that sounds like mori or something like that, which means die. It was all dreadfully sinister, I gather. When they recovered her body, there was blood smears all over everything, on the walls, on the parquet flooring, on the staircase. The police at the time, when they witnessed the scene, they'd never seen anything so macabre in their lives. They were in no doubt that Darcy had been deranged, and when they found her on the scene she had bled out. She was lying dead in a pool of her own blood. It was very clear that Darcy's husband Abraham Shannon was not equipped to look after someone as mentally unsound and as unbalanced as Darcy was. Some people were absolutely convinced the woman was demon-possessed, given the Latin writing that was found on the walls of the house, as Darcy didn't even know how to speak Latin. "Good God!" I said, staring at Pam confounded. "That is an extraordinary story. It sounds to me as if Darcy needed an exorcist rather than a mental asylum. No wonder the house looks so melancholic." "Do you tell any potential buyers to the Shannon house all this?" I asked curiously. "It's just with this kind of sales pitch, no one would ever want to buy the place, surely. I know if I'd initially been keen to buy the Shannon house based on its intriguing history, I wouldn't after you told me all this. In truth, I'd run a mile." "Well, it feels right to tell people the truth," said Pam. You have to have integrity when it comes to selling a house. If you don't, it can backfire on you. Besides, if anything bad were to happen to someone who purchased the Shannon house from me, I'd have to live with the guilt, wouldn't I? Because I would know that I'd sold them a house without due warning. I always believe in frankly laying my cards on the table and telling people the God's honest truth, even if it's not what they want to hear. Let's just say the Shannon place has a rather beleaguered history. People deserve to know the truth about it. I always believe in telling people the truth. Don't you agree? She asked me. Of course I agree, I said. But I wish other estate agents were as honest as you. But are you telling me, even after you warn people about the Shannon house, that there are people out there that actually buy the place? But of course there are people out there eager to buy the place. You'll be surprised. There's so many types of people in this world. You learn that pretty quickly when you become an estate agent. There are many people that I've warned about buying the Shannon house, but they're eager to buy it and they refuse to listen to my warnings. Let's just say when it does go on the market, we often have the for sale sign outside the house, sometimes for months at a time, and then suddenly someone will come to the house and insist on buying it. It's almost as if the Shannon house itself has chosen them rather than the other way around, because the house seems to have some kind of hold over them. I will tell them the sordid history about the place, and they simply don't care about it. They say they're not superstitious. They absolutely don't believe in ghosts. They want to move in right away. But alas, they never last long in the house. None of these people ever tell me what happened to them, or why they just up and left the place. Well, most of them don't. They tend to be very guarded about the matter if I ask any inquiring questions about why they suddenly want to sell. I will come into the office one day and receive a phone call, and I'll find that they've moved away, and they usually left the Shannon house in the middle of the night, and they asked me to put the property up for sale. Some of them organise a removal company to pick up all their things. They don't even want to step back into the house, which suggests something gave them one hell of a scare. It certainly sounds like it, I agreed. I've never believed in ghosts and things like that before, but when people abandon their house in the middle of the night without ever looking back and getting some other organisation to pack away all their worldly things, well, it certainly gives you pause for thought, don't you think? Absolutely. You echo my sentiments, said Pam, and the sentiments of many of the locals living around here. If you speak to the folk around here, many of them will tell you that they believe the ghost of Darcy Shannon has a manic episode once every 6 months, like she did in life, and that's when she throws the current owners of the Shannon house out. That's what they believe is going on, but it's all speculation. It's interesting to note that none of the people that have purchased the Shannon house have ever been local. Really? I said. That is curious. You'd think that more of the locals would do anything to live on the town's most revered street. Not really, said Pamela. People around here would never touch the Shannon house with a barge pole. But to outsiders, some of them think the Shannon house is absolutely delightful. They'll see it online and are drawn to it for some reason. The previous buyer, for example, saw the house online and called me up at once about the house, saying she just had to have it. I said to her, "Ma'am, you haven't even seen the Shannon house yet." But she didn't care about that. I informed her all about the bleak history, but that didn't bother her in the slightest, and shortly afterwards she and her family had moved in. But 6 months later they were all but gone, and were not remotely forthcoming as to why they'd suddenly left in the middle of the night. When I asked the woman directly why she'd upped and left in the middle of the night, I asked her what had happened and why she wanted to sell. She was very brusque with me and said, in a very cool tone of voice, "It's none of your business." So that was me well and truly put in my place, let me tell you. It goes without saying that I won't want you to show me around the Shannon house, I told Pam, because I'd never buy a place like that. But I might as well see the house opposite. The house opposite is absolutely charming, Pamela assured me. She raised a hand as if to stop me from talking. "I know what you're going to say, Miss Hoffman." I raised a brow. "What am I going to say?" "Well, I'm guessing because the house opposite overlooks the Shannon house, you wouldn't want to buy it. Am I right?" "I was rather thinking that." "You took the words out of my head," I admitted soberly. "I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm very attracted to the price of the house. and the fact that it's situated on the town's most historic, alluring street. The house itself is absolutely gorgeous, I can see from the outside, but I have to ask myself whether I'm happy of overlooking such a menacing view. When I look at the Shannon house, well, it makes my skin crawl. I understand where you're coming from in this, Miss Hoffman, but I urge you to see the bigger picture. I'm going to be absolutely straight with you. For the kind of money you want to spend on a house in this town, and your limited budget, you're not going to get very much for the price that you're offering. You're going to need a whole lot more money, especially if you want to buy a house of this quality. And you could never afford to buy a house on this historic street unless the price was significantly slashed. The only reason such an awesome-looking property is going for such a steal is simply because it overlooks the Shannon house. People don't want to buy properties that overlook haunted locations or cemeteries. The way I see it, Miss Hoffman, is you've got for yourself a sound investment. Hand on heart, I'd buy this house myself if I had the funds to do so. And who knows, one of these days someone will likely renovate the Shannon house, or even throw a wrecking ball at it. And so your view will be a whole lot less menacing, and you'll be able to know that you got this place for a real deal. So you think it's a great investment for me to buy this place? I asked. Well, I haven't shown you around it yet, have I? But I assure you it is utterly charming, even better on the inside than on the outside. You can see it's a Victorian double-storey home, much smaller in contrast to the Shannon house, of course, but sizable enough. And there are 4 bedrooms in this house, and 3 bathrooms. And yes, to answer your question, I absolutely believe it's a good investment. If you absolutely abhor overlooking the Shannon house, word of advice, just keep your living room curtain permanently drawn, like the previous owner obviously did. But put it this way, for the same amount of money, the other houses around here that I can show you, they are very small by contrast. Nor are they situated in such an illustrious street such as this. This delightful Victorian house I'm showing you around today boasts incredible unique features, rather like the original parquet flooring, which is in stunning condition, as you can see. You may also observe that the owners have replaced the old wallpaper with a Dassac-style wallpaper, which I believe is practically identical to the original wallpaper, although it's not nearly so dark, so it brightens the house up considerably in this lighter shade. There are some original ornate chandeliers in this house that have been here since the house was first built, that you won't find in a modern home. Everything is in excellent condition, and the highly decorated tiled floor in the entrance hall is extremely elaborate. The previous owners ensured that the maintenance of this utterly delightful Victorian home was kept up to scratch, and you'll be glad to know that the kitchen has been recently renovated, and all the lavish curtains that adorn the bay windows are in keeping with the style of the property. When Pam showed me around the Victorian house that was soon to become my home, and I saw how spaciously cosy it was, I realized what a great deal I was getting, and I knew absolutely that I would be looking a gift horse in the mouth if I foolishly walked away. So I snapped up the house at once, and soon settled down into my home like a duck to water. I was fortunate to be able to furnish the house at a steal, for an old lady had died in town, and the auction that I was able to attend provided me with all the much-needed furnishing that I would require for my home. It goes without saying my mother badgered me every single day to come back home, with her nagging phone calls that never ever seemed to abate. It was rather like having a fly buzzing in my ear a couple of times a day. But I put up with my mother's phone calls with gritted teeth, as I knew if I ignored her, the next thing I would find was she'd be at my doorstep demanding to know why I'd refused to answer her phone calls. "It's not the same, love, without you around. It really isn't. We miss you so dreadfully," she complained. "The place is so soulless without you. Please reconsider coming back home, love. We really need you around the place." In the next breath my mother would rant and say, "It's so selfish of you to up and leave us so abruptly, Miranda." "I'll have you know, Miranda, I'm not feeling dreadfully well these days. I'm getting these mysterious throbbing migraine headaches. They just won't stop. I guess it's all brought on by the dreadful stress of your not being around. The doctor certainly seems to think so. I knew my mother was throwing out all the bait she possibly could in order to drag me back home, but I was not going to bite. In truth, I felt free for the very first time in my entire life, and when a bird is released from the confines of its cage, it ain't going to go back to its previous prison in a hurry. I had created for myself a cosy home. I had made friends in town, and on top of it all my business was going remarkably well, and better than it had ever done so before. Granny Violet had been absolutely right. She told me that I'd have the courage to find my feet in the world without my mother propping me up like a china doll on the settee, and she was right. I was beginning to find out who I was. My confidence was surging every day. I was even selling some of my creations to a local pet shop in town, and my doggy coats seemed to be selling like hotcakes with many of the locals and visitors alike. So I was making a good living for myself, and in my spare time I would take casual strolls down one of the woodland trails at the back of the Shannon house, and I really was beginning to enjoy my new life. One night, as I was drawing the curtains in the living room, I glanced out towards the Shannon house. Sometimes I did this so instinctively, before the wise little voice in my head warned me to please look away. But on this sober occasion I couldn't help myself, for I had to look, as my gaze lingered for longer than it probably should have done, and that was when, under the pearly effervescent light of a full moon, in a black tenebrific sky, dotted with a kaleidoscope of silvery stars, I observed the distinctive shadowy shape or silhouette of a woman on the 3rd floor of the Shannon house, when it was currently supposed to be unoccupied, as the for sale sign was resolutely still posted outside the front of the house. I stared at the woman, and for a while she stared back at me. I could feel her looking at me, her dark eyes drilling directly into mine, and in that harrowing moment my flesh physically crawled. I blinked for a brief second and thought, what the hell did I see just then? And when I looked up again at the window, the woman was all but gone, and I told myself that I had all but imagined it. It was so much easier that way than to actually admit to myself that I had seen something. I didn't want to believe, even for an idle second, that I might possibly have laid eyes on the ghost of Darcy Shannon. It was a couple of days later that the for sale sign was finally removed from outside the Shannon house, and a family of 4 moved into the property. I was to learn from the word around town that had spread like an untamed wildfire, that the couple called the Greenbergs, who had bought the Shannon house, had been utterly enchanted by the place, believing the Shannon house was a marvellous example of Victorian architecture at its very finest. Never mind, the house actually looked like a mausoleum. It would seem the father worked from home, and decided, much like myself, that he wanted to lay down roots in this charming historic small town. The couple's 2 children, a girl and a boy, who looked to be between the ages of both 7 and 9, started to attend the local school, and I would regularly see them dressed up in their school uniforms, being escorted by their devoted mother to and from school, which was all but a 10-minute walk away. I was so stunned that the family would buy such a menacing-looking home, with such a dark history attached to it, without so much as batting an eyelash. Did they not see what I saw when I looked at the Shannon house? Obviously not. When I bumped into Pam, the estate agent in town, who was the woman who sold me my current property, I asked her about the Greenbergs, as I was naturally curious about the people who'd moved into the house opposite me. I was thankful that Pam was not reticent to talk about the new occupants of the Shannon house. She chuckled. I told you they're always those people that, for reasons unbeknown to me, fall head over heels in love with the Shannon house. And when Julia and her husband laid eyes on the house, they just had to have it. I understand they were both taken by the place. I gather the children hate the house with a passion, and who can blame the poor little mites for that? I believe they keep telling their mother that there's a woman watching them, wearing fancy clothes. Mrs. Greenberg doesn't believe a word of it. She says her children have heard from the friends at the local school all about the fact that they're living in a house that is reputed to being haunted by a ghost by the name of Darcy Shannon, and she thinks that her impressionable children are believing these fictitious allegations. Wow, it's interesting you say that the children say that. I said. In my experience, children don't make stuff like that up, even if their own friends have told them about the ghost of Darcy Shannon and the house's dubious history. Maybe the Shannon house is haunted after all. I've never believed in such things before, but I have to say living opposite the Shannon house has given me pause for thought. I've actually seen a woman standing in the third-floor window when the house was not supposed to be occupied. I persuaded myself it was my imagination playing tricks on me, but now I'm not so sure. Maybe I actually did see something. It's funny you should say that, said Pam. You're not alone in claiming to see a woman in the house from the third-floor window. The postman's made such claims himself. He said he saw a woman looking down at him on the third-floor window when he was delivering post to the house one day. Well, that was my experience, I admitted. Pam smiled at me warmly and said, My guess is that the Greenbergs won't last at the Shannon house very long. I'll give them 6 months at the most, and then they'll be gone. You mark my words. I've seen it all before. With that in mind, I curiously watched the new owners of the Shannon house carry on with their domesticated lives, like a regular family invariably would. If the truth be told, they seemed to be settling down just fine, and the man of the house, Mr. Greenberg, had improved the garden exponentially by mowing the lawn, trimming the hedges, and putting some pretty flowers in the beds. But days later the flowers had all but died, and when he replaced the beds with yet more seedlings, the same thing happened all over again. Mr. Greenberg looked like the kind of man that was well acquainted with attending to a garden, so it was more than a little paradoxical that his nimble fingers had not successfully succeeded in nurturing the flowers in his front yard. The Shannon house, in my opinion, remained as bodefully menacing as ever. I tried not to look at it, of course, but I was curious about the Greenberg family and how they were getting along, living in such a formidable, oppressive place. 7 months duly passed without incident, and I began to believe that Pam was wrong, and that the Greenberg family was actually going to stay indefinitely there for the foreseeable future, and this idea about the place actually being haunted was all but pie in the sky. One night I had a very dramatic, vivid dream. In my dream I saw a Victorian woman with a curtain of long dark hair, and eyes that were as black as a vulture staring at me, with a vicious, spiteful glare, almost as if she hated and abhorred the very sight of me. She was looking at me vengefully, like you might look at a cockroach you have accidentally squashed in your shoe. The woman was very elegantly attired in a beautiful blue-grey distinguished dress that boasted a full skirt and a tight-fitting bodice that accentuated her very narrow waist. The woman continued to glare at me with a furious indignance. Then she spoke and said, "Get the wretched Greenberg family to leave my house at once. I'll kick them out myself if you don't. I've had about as much of them as I can possibly take." I watched the crazed woman in my dream grab a sharp knife, which she waved around at me manically, wearing a deranged grin on her face. Then, to my absolute horror, I watched her slash her wrists. She began to laugh out loud. She looked down at the blood that was trickling out of the really deep gashes in her skin, that was hemorrhaging blood like I'd never seen before. I watched the woman use the blood from her wrist to write the words "Abio" with her fingers across the walls, which I was to later find meant leave, depart, or die in Latin. I've never known any Latin before, so the fact that this word came up in my dream was more than a little disturbing. I was so bewildered by this lucid dream that I woke up in a pool of my own sweat, the word "Abio" ringing in my head like a clamorously loud church bell. I was gasping as I sat up to draw breath, wondering if this illusory dream was some kind of gruesome message delivered to me by a dead woman. In that moment I had a sudden, overwhelming urge to look out of my bedroom window, to take a peek at the Shannon house, where I'd last seen the Victorian woman staring at me a while back. My heart was thundering violently in my chest as I quickly pulled back the heavy-weight velvety curtains and glanced out onto the street that was cast under a soft shower of moonlight. My eyes were quickly drawn to the third-floor window of the Shannon house. A little voice in my head was persuading me not to look, but I just couldn't help myself. It was as if a willful force beyond my control was supernaturally nagging me to do just that. And then there she was, staring right back at me. But I knew that I was staring at the ghost of Darcy Shannon. The moonlight lit up her features all too well. So now I was in no doubt that I was seeing the woman that I had vividly seen in my dreams, who had slashed her wrists and written the Latin words Albio over the walls. The ghost of Darcy Shannon was there 1 minute and gone the next, like in a flash of light. And I remember when she vanished from my sight, I was shaking like a leaf. She had given me a message from beyond the grave, telling the Greenbergs to leave at once, or she'll deal with them. But how could I possibly go to the Greenbergs and tell them a ghostly woman in my dream had told them to leave their home? I couldn't possibly do that. Would they even believe a word of it, or heed the warning from a ghost? For 3 nights nothing happened at the Shannon house. Everything remained remarkably quiet in our street, almost unnaturally so, almost as if our street was waiting for a rude disruption to undermine its peace. One night I woke up with a start, as if someone had jolted me wide awake, and for reasons I cannot explain, I found myself dashing over to my bedroom window and quickly glancing out at the street towards the Shannon house. It was 12:10 at night. The street was cloaked in darkness, while the moon hid her shimmering face behind some cloud cover, but there was a light on in the Greenberg house, which was profoundly strange, as most people's houses were cast in the shadow of darkness at this time. I suddenly observed frantic activity coming from the Shannon house. The whole Greenberg family were dressed in pyjamas and appeared to be in quite the panic, based on the way they were rushing to their car in the middle of the night. The family quickly jumped into the car and drove away, speeding down our street at such a frantic pace, as if running away from a deadly predator. Finally the Greenberg family were gone. The street became quiet again. When I looked up at the 3rd-floor window of the Shannon house, I could see the familiar silhouette of Darcy Shannon. For a moment she held my gaze, her eyes burning into mine. I could swear she smiled, but it was not a kind, friendly smile, but a vindictive, triumphant smile. I hasten to say the Greenbergs were never seen in our small town again, and I'd often wonder what had become of them, and what had made them leave at the dead of night in their pyjamas. What had scared them so much that they had abandoned the property in the middle of the night? Once again the for sale sign went up, and I was to find answers sooner than I thought I would, as I ran into Pam, the estate agent in our town, and what she told me about the Greenberg sudden exodus left my hair curling. "What's going on with the Shannon house?" I asked her. "I notice it's gone up for sale again. I saw the Greenbergs dashing out of the house in the middle of the night. They looked terrified. They were wearing pyjamas. They couldn't get away from the Shannon house fast enough. It was so troubling to witness, let me tell you." "You saw them leave?" Pam asked me, looking both bewildered and curious. "I'm afraid so. They looked terribly haunted. Something had petrified them half to death, for sure." Pam nodded. "Didn't I tell you the Greenbergs wouldn't last there for long? Mind you, they did pass the 6-month limit, which in itself is a record. I did warn them about the history of the Shannon house, but Mrs. Greenberg insisted on buying it. Well, both of them did, actually, and now they're selling. Nothing surprises me with the Shannon house. Nobody ever lasts there terribly long in my experience. It's a little like Groundhog Day being replayed over and over again, as far as that house is concerned." "Did you happen to ask Mrs. Greenberg why she and her family left so suddenly in the middle of the night? Did she tell you what scared them so much, and why they want to sell the Shannon house all of a sudden?" "Well, as it happens, she did give me some answers. She wasn't as evasive as the other owners have been." "You mean she spoke to you? She told you why she left in the middle of the night?" I asked curiously. Pam nodded. "I thought she'd be evasive, but no, she wasn't. She was very matter-of-fact, as it happens. She told me that the children had kept complaining about a very angry Victorian woman always sneering at them and deliberately hiding their toys around the house from them. Mrs. Greenberg found her son's skateboard in the oven, would you believe? And she kept finding the children's things in weird places that she couldn't explain. She was convinced that her kids were putting their toys in these places on purpose so that they could blame it on a non-existent ghost. She did say they were complaining tirelessly about being scared all the time. One day Mrs. Greenberg's daughter went into her bedroom. She found one of her dolls had been broken into pieces. Its arms were hanging on the curtains. A head was on the bedside table, and there was a lipstick scrawl on the bathroom mirror which read, "Leave." The girl was absolutely distraught and told her mother that the horrible Victorian lady was always watching them and had killed her doll and left a horrible scrawl on the bathroom mirror. Mrs. Greenberg knew that her daughter would never break her doll into pieces, so that incident troubled her greatly, as did the mysterious scrawl in lipstick on the bathroom mirror. Both her children insisted on sharing a bedroom together, demanding that they slept with their lights on. Mrs. Greenberg continued to believe her children had been persuaded by the kids at school that they were living in a haunted house, and were so impressionable that even their minds were playing tricks on them, which of course was not true. It would seem the bizarre incident with her daughter's doll, though, continued to irk her. One day, as Mrs. Greenberg was fixing a cheese and pickle sandwich for her husband, who was working in the study at the time, she felt something tug at her hair very hard. She turned around and no one was there. She felt as if someone was watching her, and she claimed to experience a cold chill running down her spine. She thought she was going mad, and persuaded herself she had imagined the whole thing. One day she came home to find the word Abio scribbled all over the wall in her kitchen in red crayon. She was furious because her husband had only just painted the kitchen wall in a pretty yellow colour. Mrs. Greenberg was infuriated and dragged her children into the kitchen, asking them to explain themselves and why they had drawn all over the wall. But when she showed them the evidence of their so-called mischief, the writing had all but mysteriously vanished. Mrs. Greenberg began to think she was losing her mind, and was wondering if something was seriously wrong with her. On the evening when the family fled, Mr. and Mrs. Greenberg both woke up with a start one night, looking at each other in bemusement, because they heard a violent, ear-piercing crashing sound coming from the kitchen. It was such a terrible noise. It was like dishes and plates being thrown across a kitchen floor and smashed into hundreds of pieces. It was so incredibly disturbing that Mr. Greenberg told his wife to lock herself in the bedroom with the two children, which she did at once. I think the couple believed that someone may have broken into the house. Mr. Greenberg, with a rifle in his hand, rushed into the kitchen, but there was no evidence of broken china anywhere. Everything was quiet. He investigated the entire house, and even the outside, and returned back into the house more than a little bemused. Mrs. Greenberg left her children in her bedroom, telling them she'd be back soon. She wanted to investigate what had become of her husband, and what was keeping him so long. She was about to go down the staircase when Mr. Greenberg entered the house. He was looking up at her, and making all this kind of sign language at her. She wondered what her husband was saying, because he kept pointing at the staircase. What he actually said was, "Behind you. She's behind you. Watch out." Mr. Greenberg observed an irate, manic-looking, very Victorian woman, wearing a silvery grey dress, standing directly behind his wife. She was laughing very menacingly, and then suddenly she pushed Mrs. Greenberg down the staircase. "Was Mrs. Greenberg all right?" I asked. "It would seem so," said Pam. Apparently Mr. Greenberg rushed towards his wife, intercepting her fall, and stopping her from tumbling to the very bottom of the staircase. He looked up and could see the ghostly woman staring down at him from on top of the staircase. She had a manic grin on her face, and he knew by one look at the ghostly apparition that she was not only insane, but seriously dangerous. He quickly gathered his family together, and they dashed to the car. They were all wearing pyjamas at the time, and they said the house smelt very strongly of a pungent woman's perfume, which the kids claimed to often smell when the ghostly apparition was around. Mr. Greenberg said the Victorian woman he had seen looked as real as you or me, but she was absolutely insane. He was afraid for the family's well-being, which is why they fled the Shannon house, genuinely fearing for their very lives, as they believed that the ghost of Darcy Shannon was what they had seen. "So do you believe what Mrs. Greenberg told you?" I asked Pamela. Pamela shrugged her shoulders. "I don't know what to think. I know emphatically that Mrs. Greenberg is not making this up. When I first met her and showed her around the Shannon house, and informed her how the locals believed the place was haunted, and I told her about the history of the place, she pooh-poohed such nonsensical ideas, saying she'd never heard anything so insane in all her life, and that there was no such things as ghosts. And now she appears to be singing an altogether different tune, and you don't do that unless you've seen something that has really rattled you." I could not believe that no sooner had the for sale sign gone up outside the Shannon house, that I assumed would be there for several months, It was replaced with a sold sign the following day. And my first thought was, who in their right mind would buy the Shannon house, especially after the Greenbergs had fled the property in the middle of the night? Yet against all the odds, the Shannon house had been snapped up pretty quickly, and days later I knew someone had moved in, for I had seen a delivery van parked in the driveway of the Shannon house, and was curious as to who this family could possibly be that had bought the place. But when I inquisitively stared out of the window to observe the comings and goings of the removal men carrying furniture into the house covered in bubble wrap, I saw no signs of the new owners. I wondered privately if Pamela Freeman had actually told the new owners about the Greenbergs and how they'd all but run away in the middle of the night, as so incredibly haunted had they become over the house. Little did I know that I would soon meet the new owners of the Shannon house, sooner than I would have ever anticipated. It was a while later, while I was at my sewing machine, designing a brand new doggy coat, I heard a knock at the door. I wondered who could possibly be at my front door. I had made a few friends in the local area, so I thought that someone was dropping around for a cup of coffee and a quick chat. But when I opened my front door, who should be standing there but my mother? Now this was an impromptu visit that I was certainly not expecting. My parents were supposed to be visiting me later in the year. My mother was elegantly attired in a large floppy sun hat, with a scarf draped around the middle. She was wearing dark glasses and an elegant navy blue shirt dress with a pair of matching sandals. But what drew my attention to my mother the most was the broad grin on her face. I don't think I'd ever seen her look so happy. She looked like someone who'd just received a huge lottery win. "Mum! Surprise! Surprise! Look who it is!" chuckled my mother. "I bet you didn't expect me to be at your front door, Miranda dear. Why, I do believe you've gone absolutely white. All the colour is drained away from your face. Are you shocked to see me here?" "Mum! Of course I'm shocked. You never told me you were coming to this part of the world. I would have appreciated some advance notice. What are you doing here?" "What kind of a welcome is that, Miranda dear?" said my mother. "Honestly, I'd have thought you'd be a little bit more pleased to see me." "Of course I'm pleased to see you, Mum," I lied. "But why didn't you inform me you were coming? I mean, this is all a little unexpected, isn't it? I haven't even prepared a spare room for any guests. Where is Dad? Don't tell me you came alone." "Your father is back at the house, and he's doing fine, thank you very much," said my mother nonchalantly. "If you must know, he's unpacking some of the boxes. Goodness gracious me, I've had quite the morning, let me tell you, rushing around the place like a chicken without a head. But I'm a little bit more composed now that I've got the removal men to finally put the furniture in the right rooms. Goodness gracious me, they were driving me completely insane, putting the furniture down in all the wrong places. Honestly, you'd think they'd know better. I was really affronted when they put the lounge settee in the kitchen of all places. I had to tell them that a settee doesn't belong in the kitchen." "What removal men?" I asked my mother, looking perturbed. "What are you talking about?" "You mean to tell me, Miranda, that you didn't notice all the activity going on outside your front door? You do surprise me. I thought you'd have been a bit more observant than that. So I take it you haven't heard the really marvellous news, then?" "No, I haven't heard the news. What news are you talking about, Mum? Please enlighten me." "Well, me and your father have moved to the neighbourhood. I've just brought the Shannon house over the road from you. We're direct neighbours now." My face dropped. The watery smile vanished from my face, and I said, "You what? Is this some kind of a joke, Mum? Because if it is, I'm not laughing." "This isn't a joke, love. Why on earth would I pull your leg over something like this? I would have thought my being here at your front door would spell it out all too plainly for you. Me and your father have bought the Shannon house. The place went for an absolute steal. What a treasure the house is. So much fabulously flamboyant history attached to the place. I just couldn't resist buying it. And let's just say the wood groves at the back of the property go back for many miles, joining some fabulously well-established local hiking trails, so I'm told by the estate agent. I can see why you love it here so much. The countryside is absolutely perfect, and the town is so picturesque, so vintage-looking. The air is so fresh, so crystal clear. I feel as if I've stepped back in time. I think me and your father are going to be so happy living here. And with you living on the opposite side of the road, well, it doesn't get better than that, does it? But why would you buy the Shannon house, Mum? Are you completely off your rocker? I asked. No, love, I'm perfectly sane, thank you very much. And I certainly don't appreciate your insinuations. Of course I'm not mad. Moving here, let me tell you, was a very wise, well-thought-out decision. It makes perfect sense as far as I'm concerned. But why, Mum? I don't understand. I told you I needed my space and a fresh start. Well, I was thinking much the same. I was liking the idea of plenty of space and a fresh start myself. I thought it would suit me and your father just fine. I mean, you did insist on moving away, didn't you, love? And me and your father miss you so terribly. We want to be involved in your life and see you as often as we possibly can. When I looked online for a property close to yours, I couldn't believe the serendipitous good fortune that a house, a historic house of all things, was directly opposite your home, and it was for sale. I phoned the estate agent, a woman called Pamela Freeman, at once, and put in an offer for the Shannon house, said my mother, waving her hands in the air very nonchalantly. I hasten to say your father wasn't keen about us moving to your part of the world and purchasing the Shannon house. He said it was like we were stalking you, and he thought it was extremely inappropriate. But I knew you wouldn't see it like that, Miranda, would you, love? What's wrong with your parents living in close proximity to you? It's not like we're stealing your thunder or your independence. You have your new life and your beautiful home, but you have us any time you need us, only a hair's breadth away from you. And what could be more ideal than that? Mum, did the estate agent warn you about the Shannon house? I asked her. For a moment my mother looked somewhat bemused. Warn me about the Shannon house? What on earth are you talking about, love? You've lost me, I'm afraid. Well, the Shannon house, it's haunted. It's got an unpleasant history. Why would you buy a place like that, Mum? You do know the previous owners, the Greenbergs, up and fled in the middle of the night. I saw them leave myself, Mum. They were affrighted, let me tell you. Oh, yes, I do remember the estate agent, Pamela Freeman, talking to me about such things. Goodness gracious, she was so reluctant to sell the Shannon house to me. She kept saying, did I know what I was getting myself into? You know, honestly, you'd think she'd be glad to sell the place. Anyway, she kept going on about the high turnover of people who've purchased the Shannon house over the years and subsequently fled. That doesn't intimidate me at all. She enlightened us to the history of the house and what happened there all those years ago in the Victorian times. But it certainly doesn't impact us now, does it? On the contrary, the vibrant history just adds to the Shannon house's charm, rather than detract from it as far as I'm concerned. Ma'am, the Shannon house is not charming. The place is so menacing. Have you seen the burgeoning vines all over the grey walls? How dark the house looks all the time. How sinister it appears. It's far from charming, Mum. Oh, goodness gracious me. Listen to yourself, Miranda. Of course the place is absolutely charming. You're beginning to sound as scathing as your father, who never liked the property the moment he saw it. The house is steeped in a rich history, for goodness sake, which is probably why many of the impressionable locals living around here naively seem to believe the place is haunted. Honestly, have you ever heard such poppycock in all your life? I suspect it's the unenviable product of living in a small town. People like to gossip, don't they? And they believe in these fanciful fairy tales. But I'm not going to entertain any of this fictitious nonsense, or give such thoughts any credence. Ma'am, there's nothing fanciful about these stories that concern the Shannon house. I promise you there's something seriously wrong with the place. Even when I first came to this town, I was reluctant to buy this house of mine, even though the price tag was irresistible, simply because it overlooked the house you've just bought. If you must know, the reason why I got this house that I now own, much cheaper than the normal asking price of a place like this, is because people just do not want to buy a house that overlooks a haunted house, do they? Well, more fool them, said my mother, with a contemptuous snort. Their loss is our gain. That's the way I see it. Honestly, some people do believe in all this hocus-pocus stuff and nonsense. I'm very glad I'm not caught up in this illusory world that doesn't even exist, for goodness sake. Mum, haven't you heard a single word I've just said? The Shannon house is seriously menacing. I can't believe you bought it, Mum. I'm really disappointed that you did. Believe it or not, I was actually wondering to myself, who would be insane enough to buy the property, only to discover that it's my mother that bought it. I didn't expect that in a million months of Sundays. My face grew much more solemn, and I said in a troubled, disquieted voice that betrayed my grievous concern, Mum, I'm not sure you and Dad are safe living there. I'm being serious. I'm very worried about the both of you. Oh, listen to yourself, Miranda. You do talk such nonsense. I would have credited you with a little bit more intelligence and common sense than that, as to believe an old wife's tale such as this. Honestly, Miranda, you do talk nonsense. You're sounding like some of the folk in town that are so superstitious. I would have credited you with a little bit more intelligence and common sense than that. I mean, I'd never have expected you to believe in an old wives' tale about the Shannon house being haunted, for goodness sake. I'd have expected you to realize that things like ghosts weren't real. You used to say that you didn't believe in stuff like that growing up. I can't understand what's come over you. I suspect it must be the influences of living in a small town. It's rubbing off on you, in the most unbecoming of ways, if you don't mind my saying. I hope living here isn't going to make you susceptible to believing in all this stuff. How does Dad feel about the house, Mum? I asked. You said he didn't like the look of the place. My mother pulled a contorted face and waved her long hand in the air in a fanning gesture. You know your father. Always disapproves of most of the choices I make in life. I'm pretty used to it now, if you must know. Well, he didn't want to move to this small town for a start, and was dead set against it. But you know me. I can be awfully persuasive when I want to be. Of course, my own mother, your Granny Violet, was absolutely furious with me for buying the house opposite yours, would you believe? Honestly, that woman loves to meddle in my life. She said she'd given you the money to buy your own place and not for me to stalk you like this. I mean, honestly, the very idea that I'm stalking you is insane. I mean, what's wrong with living close to your daughter, I ask you? Your father wouldn't let me sell the house back at home, so we have to let it out to tenants for about 3 months or so. He's absolutely enraged at me for buying the Shannon house. And like you, he seems to be spooked by the place. The moment we arrived here, he kept saying the house gave him the heebie-jeebies. I've never known him to be like that before. I guess that maybe some of the common folk stories that people have been spewing around here have in some way rubbed off on your father. Honestly, and as for that estate agent, well, honestly, she wouldn't stop going on about how she was concerned about us buying this place, and that there were rumours and, I don't know. I switched off, let me tell you. I'd never have thought your father would be manipulated into believing that ghosts could potentially be real. It seems, really, that he might believe the house is haunted. I don't think Dad's overreacting, Mum. He's being instinctive. He sensed there's something off about the place. And he's right. There's something wrong with the Shannon house. And I promise you, you'll find out about it soon enough. And then you'll be persuaded to fix your beliefs. I'm telling you, Mum, you won't last there long. Nobody ever does. But I'm sure Pamela Freeman told you as much. Well, she did. But I can tell you I don't buy into any of that nonsense. Me and your father are going to be extremely happy here. I'm looking forward to settling down in this charming small town and living close to my beautiful daughter on the opposite side of the street. Think about it. It's going to be so much fun. I'll be able to pop over to your house any time I like, especially if I've run out of a bowl of sugar or something. It'll be like the old days, don't you think?" As you can imagine, I was devastated that my mother had moved to the small rural town and was now living directly opposite me in that monstrosity of a haunted house that she had unwittingly dragged my father to against his will. And I could see he was not remotely happy about living in the Shannon house, and I couldn't blame him for that. I wondered if he managed to get a wink of sleep at night, lying under that roof. I soon became a regular visitor to the Shannon house, having stepped over the threshold against my will. I hasten to say, the heavy Victorian interior of the home was inauspiciously bodeful. The house was disproportionately dark on the inside, as if the light had been all but compromised, and was made all the more formidable by the dark, oppressive wallpapers in the house, the heavy curtains and dark furnishings. My mother seemed to be in her element, and spent all her spare time decorating the property to make it sumptuously cosy. But I doubted she would reach her ambitious objectives, as how could you possibly make a silk purse out of a sow's ear? Much like my father, I also had the feeling that when I was in the house that something was watching me all the time. I regret to say my mother began paying me regular visits at my home, and was starting to get under my skin, and slowly but surely she began to repeat some of her age-old habits of the past, even though she wasn't exactly sharing a house with me. But her constant interference in my daily routines was really getting me down, as I saw my independence almost vaporizing, rather like the steam from a kettle. It had never crossed my mind that my mother might follow me to my new location, where I lived, but now that she was here, she had become like a thorn in my side. I realized pretty quickly that some dragons in life you simply can't escape, and my mother was clearly one of them. I had moved away from home, all but to get away from the shackles of my mother's stronghold over my life. But I suspect after I left home, she felt she'd lost control over me in some way, and the only way she could get some of that back was to buy a property close by to mine, and preferably opposite me, so she could keep a bird's-eye view over me, and have some measure of influence over my life, which is exactly what she wanted. It was absolutely awful to feel her breathing down my neck the whole time, but there wasn't exactly much I could do about it, apart from gritting my teeth. My mother had already rather deviously had a spare key made to my house, so she could let herself into my property at will, whenever she pleased. This behaviour was already beginning to rub me up the wrong way. It had been such a pleasure to come to this small, rural, rather quaint town and gain some distance from my mother, and some much-needed space. Now my mother was back in my life. Dare I say it, rather like an unfortunate infestation of termites that I couldn't keep at bay. Don't get me wrong, I loved my mother very much, but I knew her indomitable hold over me was not a healthy one. I had, however, one reassurance in my heart that brought me a small measure of comfort. I knew unequivocally my mother would not last long in the Shannon house. I was certain the angry ghost of Darcy Shannon would spit my mother out soon enough, and my mother would quickly run back home with her tail between her legs, wondering why she'd been mad enough to come to the small town in the first place, and once again I would regain my independence, and that was a promising thought. Of course my father apologized to me profusely, hanging his head in shame rather bashfully, because my mother had bought the Shannon house. "I tried to stop her, love," he told me apologetically, knitting his bushy brows together to form a deep furrow. "But your mother is so damned impulsive. You know what she's like. We're now living in the town's most haunted house, would you believe? And that in itself gives me the heebie-jeebies. But there's no stopping your mother when she gets her plans into action. And this is a rather unfortunate one, I have to say. Your mother thinks all the stories connected to this house, about it being haunted, I mean, are fabrications. But I'm not so sure about that." "Dad, you're intuitive. Your feelings are very real. Don't dismiss them out of hand because of what Mum told you. I'm telling you there's something wrong with the Shannon house. I keep telling Mum that, but she refuses to listen. Everyone leaves the Shannon house after about 6 months, and when they leave, they are usually in quite the state, let me tell you." My father nodded soberly. "The estate agent told us the stories connected to the Shannon house. But you know what your mother's like. She paid them no heed. The good news is if people leave the Shannon house after a short period of time, hopefully we'll be out of your hair, your mother and I, in 6 months' time or so. We can keep our fingers crossed about that." "Dad, don't blame yourself for coming to this small town. This is Mum's fault, not yours." "I told your mother in no uncertain terms that coming to this small town was practically stalking you. Even her mother Violet told her as much. But your mother was refusing to listen to our advice. There was no stopping her. She's bloody-minded and impulsive." "Don't tell me what I already know, Dad." "Well, anyway, what can you do? Your mother is your mother. They broke the mold when they made her." My parents managed to live at the Shannon house without incident for about 2 months, until all hell broke loose in the house one night. I had retired to bed early that night, and I woke with quite the start when I heard this frantic banging coming from my front door. What the hell, I thought, wondering who could be trying to get my attention at this time of night. I hurriedly jumped out of bed, with a somewhat apprehensive reticence that was dappled with a profound sense of foreboding, for I knew that nobody comes knocking at your door this late at night unless something is very wrong. Please God, no, I thought. I quickly wrapped my lightweight dressing gown around myself, slipping my small feet into my slip-on slippers, and then I trudged down the staircase, with the residues of sleep making my vision somewhat blurry. My father's voice broke the foggy state of my mind when I heard him call out, "Miranda, I need your help. Something's not right with your mother." My father's words propelled me to the front door at the speed of a bullet. The first thought that came into my head was that my mother was ill, or had taken poorly. Had she had a heart attack, perhaps? But she was far too young for that, surely. I hurriedly opened the door, my fingers trembling on the chain, my heart thundering violently in my chest. My father was standing in the doorway, wearing a pair of blue and white pinstripe pyjamas. He hadn't even bothered to put on a dressing gown, and his feet were bare. I noticed his face was drained of all its colour, and judging by his alarmed, affrighted expression, I knew that something was terribly wrong. His words were staggered and filled with a great trepidation. I don't know what's wrong with your mother, love. I really don't know what's going on with her. I thought you could possibly speak to her, to calm her down, perhaps. But she's behaving very strangely. Something's not right with her." "Have you called the emergency services?" I asked my father. "Maybe she's had a stroke or a heart attack." My father shook his head solemnly. "It's not like that, Miranda. Your mother's not sick, nor has she had a heart attack. It's just, how can I put it? She's not acting like herself. It's like she's possessed." "What do you mean, possessed?" I asked. "Come and see for yourself, love," said my father. "It's hard to explain to you in words. You need to see it to believe it, I'm afraid." Me and my father hurried quickly back to the Shannon house, our breathing fast and furious. When I entered the house, my heart was still visibly doing somersaults in my chest, for I didn't know what I would find when I approached my mother. There she was in the living room, flapping around the place like a frantic pigeon, trying to find an open window. One look at her and I absolutely knew that this was not my mother that I was seeing. Her eyes were consumed with such darkness, they didn't even look like my mother's eyes, and that I found to be incredibly disquieting. My mother was flying around the house, charging from room to room like a deranged lunatic, hardly even noticing that I was there. It was like she was caught up in her own little illusory world. She kept mumbling under her breath, and it didn't even sound like she was talking English. What the hell was going on with her? My mother had gone back into the living room after me and my father had followed her from one room to another. She stood still for a moment and then hurriedly ran over to the curtains, yanking them back very hard. Then she stood staring out at the woods rather wistfully, that were cast under the shadow of a silvery moon. "Ma'am, it's me," I said, trying to distract her from her trance-like state. now that she was standing still. Hopefully she might notice me. "Dad called me over to the house to see if you were all right. He's worried about you, Mum. He was saying you're having a bit of a meltdown. Would you like to talk about it, perhaps? Maybe you could tell me what's the matter with you, why you appear to be so frantic." My mother turned around to look at me, but there was no recognition in her eyes. They had become like empty, lifeless sockets, filled with an inky black colour. But the most disturbing thing of all was that there was a manic grin on my mother's face. "Don't come near me," she hissed in a warning voice that was more like a growl, "or I'll kill you. Get away from me." And the voice that came out of her just was demonical. It sent shivers of dread down my spine. I'd never heard my mother talk like this before. It wasn't her. She wasn't in her body. Something else was in her body. I don't know what was going on with her, but it was terrifying to say the very least. "See," whispered my father, "it's like something's taken over your mother's body." "Mum, it's me, Miranda. What's going on? Are you all right?" I said, walking towards the curtains to approach her as gingerly as I could. "You don't sound like yourself, Mum. What's wrong with you?" My father stepped behind me. He reached out to touch my mother's hand. "Love, it's Miranda. You can talk to her if you like. Tell her what's troubling you. She can talk to you, can't she, Miranda? That's why she's here." "Yes, Mum, I'm here for you," I said, not knowing quite how to react to my mother's unorthodox behaviour, as the grin she was wearing on her face was becoming increasingly more manic. My mother jolted forward, pushed my father backwards, shoving him so hard that my dad lost his footing. He fell back for a moment, but managed to get back onto his feet with no harm done, I'm relieved to say. My mother grabbed a glass vase off the table, throwing it violently at my father. It missed him by a fraction, and roses were scattered all over the floor. Glass lay broken in jagged pieces on the ground. My mother grabbed a sharp piece of glass, and with a manic grin still on her face, began to slash one of her wrists. What the hell was she doing? This was unbelievable. "Mum, stop, will you? Stop, you're hurting yourself. You're cutting yourself. Mum, you've got to stop." Me and my father, without sparing a second thought for our own safety, instinctively rushed towards my mother, to grab her and hold her down, while my father tried to yank the piece of glass out of my mother's hands. There was blood pouring over everything, gushing out of one of my mother's incisions on her wrists. Crimson droplets of blood magnanimously spattered across my mother's white nightie, while my father was getting cut from his courageous attempts to remove the deadly weapon from my mother's hand. My father was bleeding all over his blue and white pinstripe pyjamas, but he didn't give up in his attempts to get the treacherous weapon out of my mother's hand. But she held on to it with a formidable vice-like grip that was almost superhuman. What the hell was going on in this house, I wondered? Why was my mother idiosyncratically behaving as if she was consumed with a manic schizophrenia and an overwhelming desire to slash her wrists? A strange language was coming out of my mother's mouth. I knew one of the Latin words albio, which means leave or die. I suddenly realized that my mother must be possessed by the deranged spirit of Darcy Shannon herself, the woman who'd slashed her wrists in the 1800s and had been found by the authorities dead in the house after she'd thrown her husband to his death. Was my mother acting out Darcy Shannon's last moments, like a horror scene from the 1800s being played out again in real time? Had my mother now become Darcy Shannon? It would certainly seem so. I realized with a dreadful horror that if Darcy's spirits had taken over my mother's body, that her life was now in serious jeopardy, for something else had control over her body, and she was powerless to fight against it. If my mother succeeded in slashing her wrists like Darcy Shannon had done, then she could potentially kill herself, and history would once again repeat itself in the Shannon house. And we couldn't allow that to happen to my mother. She had to be stopped from harming herself. With a brute strength, my mother managed to escape me and my father's firm grasp. We simply didn't have the strength to hold her down, for she had become unfathomably powerfully strong. Before we could stop her, she had pulled back the sliding door in the living room that led onto the wraparound porch, and she was running down the steps across the backyard, making a beeline into the woods, still holding the large piece of fiercely sharp glass in her hands, which I was in no doubt she was going to use on herself, to finish the job of slashing her wrists. She was getting away from us to finish what she'd started, without the threat of us trying to stop her in any way. "Go after her, Miranda," my father screamed. "She's going to cut herself. She's already attempted to slash one of her wrists. She must be stopped, or she'll die." I began to furiously run after my mother. My breathing became raspy. My heartbeat boomed like a pounding drum that refused to abate. I was clad in my impractical attire, wearing a skimpy pair of pyjamas and a pair of slippers that was constantly sliding off my feet very inconveniently. But I took no notice of such trivial impediments, or the very fact that my vision on this night was dreadfully impaired. But I wouldn't allow any of this to dull my progress. I was welcomed into the grove by a tangle of trees that stood together side by side in tight clusters, making the footpaths precariously narrow. Their tall, lofty silhouettes blocked out the moonlight, while the branches, like gnarled, ugly hands, lashed out at my skin, and thorny briars tore into my flesh. My feet kept falling out of my slippers, but I noticed none of this. My lumbering, ungainly efforts to give my mother chase were pretty useless, to say the least, but I knew she couldn't be making much progress in the woods, for the light was so dreadfully obscure. So I slowed down my pace significantly, trudging around in the darkness rather like a blind man. In the distance I thankfully saw a light. I ran towards it instinctively. There was a large clearing where the trees were scattered and more widespread, so thankfully the moonlight spilled out her pearly glaze over everything, so at long last I could see more clearly. Then I saw the figure of my mother, sitting under a tree, her legs crossed over each other, her focus intent on slashing her wrists, while she had a demented grin on her face. Her white nightgown was now splattered liberally with blood, as it began to trickle out from the open wounds. I let out a scream. "Mum, stop! You've got to stop! You're hurting yourself! Please give me the glass, Mum! Give it to me!" My mother looked up at me, but in her dark, vacuously empty eyes, I saw only two soulless voids. It was like my mother wasn't present in her own body. I was not seeing my mother, but something tenaciously evil. I knew something demonic had taken over her body. I stood there for a brief moment, watching in horror as the blood spurted from my mother's open gashes, where her white nightdress looked like something out of a macabre crime scene movie, for it was fast becoming crimson. All of a sudden I saw him. I have no idea who he was, or whereabouts he came from, but he was like an answer to my earnest prayers, the prayers I'd been screaming out inside my head, that I'd been unable to articulate or even voice. I knew at once what I was seeing. It was a strapping male Bigfoot. He was about 11 foot tall, with burly, robust proportions that were nothing short of impressive. I have never seen anything more imposing, or so impressive in my entire life. And when my mother saw him, she screamed and screamed, for she was gripped with terror. In those dark eyes that did not belong to my mother, I witnessed what I can only describe as a palpable fear. Whatever had possessed my mother clearly saw the Bigfoot as an obvious threat, rather like a demon when it's confronted with a splattering of holy water. My mother did not move, almost as if she was held captive under a powerful spell that she could not fight against. The glass dropped from her hand, falling onto the forest floor, and dark eyes were fixed on the Bigfoots, while my mother began to growl at the creature. But the fear never left her eyes for a single second. I was frozen to the spot, my jaw dropping to the ground, as I watched the Bigfoot ripping pieces of my mother's nightdress into long strips and tying them to her wounds to stop the flow of blood. I knew he was helping my mother, and that his sterling, valiant efforts were saving her life. The Bigfoot began to speak in an ancient language, the likes of such I've never heard before or since. His words were authoritative and demanding. My mother began to scream and scream when he spoke, as if the words he spoke were torturing the demon inside her. Finatalikas, hatilatanki, shilasikwani, kilatan santo, katila kibosha, kila dolabani, kolosikali. The more the Bigfoot spoke, the more my mother began to scream and scream, as if she really was being tormented. Then all of a sudden, I watched as this big, dense black cloud came rising out of my mother's chest. The smoke began to twirl, circulate, and take shape, becoming a hugely grotesque, giant-sized demonical beast that took a solid form. It had red eyes and a reptilian kind of skin, with a humanoid head, along with 2 prominent horns. The Bigfoot continued to chant, "Ka kikwasi, hamfakina, hagilasi, ho latina," and then the dark entity just fled, disappearing into a wisp of black smoke into the ether, and everything became still, calm, and very serene. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. My mother at this point was lying across the forest floor, not moving an inch. All was silent. It almost looked as if she was dead. The Bigfoot continued to chant, and then a small yellow orb of light popped out of my mother's chest, like an illuminated ping-pong ball. The light left my mother's body, and then it too took shape, and that was when I saw the ghostly figure of Darcy Shannon herself, whom I recognized immediately in the silvery grey dress she was wearing. But this time she looked to be in her right mind. The Bigfoot spoke to Darcy. "Kintaki, hakasanato, basikala." She nodded, turned around to look at me, and smiled. I could swear I heard the words in my head. "Thank you. Thank you for setting me free." And then finally, she was gone. My mother remained unflinching on the forest floor. Her face looked white and ghost-like. Her eyes seemed empty. The Bigfoot then looked up at me and said to me telepathically, "Get her help. She'll be fine." And with that he glided away, before I even got the chance to thank the creature for saving my mother's life. All of a sudden my mother opened her eyes. She sat up with quite a start, and looked nonplussed to find herself in the woods in the middle of the night like this, for she had no memory of what she was doing there. "What's going on, Miranda? Why on earth am I in the woods in the middle of the night of all things? Goodness gracious, look at my nightdress. I'm covered in blood. And what are these bandages on my wrist? Why is my nightdress so ripped up? Is this some absurd kind of dream?" she asked me. Before I could answer my mother's question, my breathless father was at her side, as well as a team of paramedics that he had called. My mother was rushed to hospital on a stretcher. The doctors told me, had I not wrapped the bandages around my mother's wrists, she would have ultimately bled out and died. I felt guilty for taking the credit for something I never did, as everyone thought I was a hero, including my mother herself. Looking back at the bizarre event, I do think Darcy Shannon from the 1800s knew that she was probably possessed by a demon. Maybe she tried to slash her wrists to free herself from the demonic stronghold that had oppressed her life for so long. I think the demon that took occupancy in Darcy Shannon's body made her come across to doctors at the time as having a mental condition like schizophrenia, when in actual fact my belief is that Darcy Shannon was possessed by a demon, the same demon that had taken control of my mother's body. When I encountered the Bigfoot in the woods, he knew exactly how to help my mother. First he attended to her wounds, and then he pulled out the demonic entity, as if he was conducting an exorcism of sorts. And finally, after he'd removed the demonic entity, Darcy Shannon was set free, and was probably able to cross over to the light. Who knows, maybe she was looking for the right person to set her free from the possession that had crippled her life even in death, and now she'd found my mother, and my mother must have been the right vessel in which to finally achieve the peace for which she obviously craved. I'm glad to tell you this story ends better than I could have ever anticipated. My mother decided that living in a small town was not for her. I think finding herself in the woods soaked to the skin in her own blood had given her quite the scare. I was relieved I wouldn't have her breathing down my neck any more. But the best news of all is that the Shannon house changed. It was as if the menacing energy had been lifted off the place. New people called the Tennysons moved into the property. They painted the grey walls white. They transformed the entire house. It's been 10 years now, and the Tennysons still live happily in the Shannon house, and it is no longer an unpleasant eyesore for me to look upon. I do think the ghost of Darcy Shannon has long gone. The Shannon house has found its peace. I still live in my beautiful home, but I'm now married to my husband Paul. We have 2 delightful children, a girl and a boy. and my mother is no longer an albatross around my neck. But I do see her and my father from time to time. Suffice to say, after the paradoxical incident that occurred all those years ago, she has become a much nicer person. As for the Bigfoot, I've never seen him again, but I know he saved my mother's life that night, and for that I'm eternally grateful. So there you are. That's my story.
Well, hello there. I hope you enjoyed the Omnibus edition. We've got many more coming our way for you to listen to. Sending you love wherever you are in the world, in North America, Canada, Kenya, wherever you may be. I send you lots and lots of love. Thank you for listening to my Omnibus, and I really do hope you enjoyed it, because that's the whole idea about it, is to give you some interesting stories to listen to. So until next time, goodbye and good night.